So if you have a cell phone, please turn it off or silence it. I will call to order the work session for the Oregon City Commission for Tuesday, March 13th, 2018. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Shaw?
Here.
Commissioner Mangelberg?
Here.
Commissioner Ide?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Mayor Holliday?
Here. So immediately following the work session, we will hold an executive session pursuant to ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with the person designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. Anybody have anything for a future agenda item?
For the work session?
Yes?
I do.
Okay.
Me too.
Commissioner Mayberg?
I would like to propose that the commission consider a hearings officer for future planning appeals.
I would support that.
Yep, let's do it.
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
I think there are pros and cons to that, so, you know, want to make sure we have full discussion. And Commissioner Ide, you had something?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about the construction excise tax for affordable housing, the pros and cons of initiating something like that, and I would like to suggest that we have a work session just to learn more about that, the feasibility of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, good idea.
All right.
And then one other thing, recently someone brought to our attention the potential for improving Abernethy Creek Park, and I just thought it was a really great idea, and thought that I wondered if we could have a discussion on that as well.
Where is Abernethy Creek Park?
Oh, it's the bridge down there on Washington Street.
Where the lady passed away in the fire in 10.
Yeah.
Near Washington.
Try
On that side, not on the other side of the creek?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like in the sidewalk area.
Because I know that the city bought some of those houses after the 96 flood, and we raised them, and that's just open space now on the other side of the creek.
Okay, yeah, right, that other side, yeah. That's
Okay.
not the side we're talking about. There's consensus for that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Great.
I was sitting and waiting for an exec session by myself with Wyatt.
It says to immediately follow the city commission work session.
I know. After we read it, we figured that out.
You excited about something?
Ms. Riggs can catch you up on what we talked about.
Thank you.
So moving on, discussion items 18-130, overview of the final recommendations from the joint engineering study between the City of Oregon City and Clackamas River Water. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor and City Commissioners, and Brian and Martin, you want to come forward? Brian and Martin are going to be presenting for us, but thank you for taking the time to get us on your agenda. For the past several months, we've been putting a lot of energy into a joint engineering analysis, which is really between the city and Clackamas River Water. And Martin, they're here. I think this is the right one. So last time we met on this was in August. I don't know if you remember, it was kind of a summer evening. It was a nice evening. It was one of the first meetings we had in the library, and we had a joint meeting with the Clackamas River Water District. And I think everybody was there. Does everybody remember that? That was my recollection.
Yeah.
You weren't there? How could you have missed? It was a very compelling, interesting presentation. I'm sure you wouldn't have forgotten this, Commissioner O'Donnell. So, so we had that meeting. We didn't get a lot of feedback at that meeting, right? We didn't hear a lot. We presented a fair amount. We're going to go over some of that again. Just know that we've kind of had conversations with Clackamas River Water for years, but the more recent history and kind of where this came from was from a 2014 settlement agreement that the city had with Clackamas River Water. And that was not just with Clackamas River Water, that was between us, South Fork, Clackamas River Water, Sunrise Water Authority, and a group made up of some of those groups called the Clackamas Regional Water Commission. And at the time, we were concerned about just how Clackamas River Water and some of those others were pursuing their business model as they move forward. So out of that came some discussion. There was a LUBA appeal that went into that the city issued. And as a result of that and some follow-up discussions with Clackamas River Water, we came to an agreement that, hey, first of all, yes, the city, has boundaries and obviously can convey water to customers. But, as our city limits grow, we can take those areas into our jurisdiction, withdraw them from the Clackamas River Water Territory. That was one thing. The other thing was, there was agreement that, hey, if you're going to do that, you really need an engineering study to talk about how that's going to happen in an orderly way, so that both Oregon City and Clackamas River Water will be treated, fairly in how those transactions happen. So that's a lot of what this agreement is about. Our team has been led by the consultant firm of Murray Smith and Associates, and really Brian Gintner is the lead contact for us on that. He's got helpers there at Murray Smith as well, but he's been the point man for us. And really, Martin has been doing a bunch of work on this. Alita has been doing a bunch of work. I just want to acknowledge them. It's definitely been all hands on deck for us when we don't have necessarily a water-specific engineering group, so it's kind of been good to have Murray Smith there to help us on the technical aspects and really kind of help facilitate the conversation. They work for CRW as well, and they work for us in other capacities, so we've got good working relationships, so that's really worked out pretty well. But with that, I think Martin's going to take the next couple of slides, and then we're going to turn it over to Brian.
Katie, this isn't.
Is that not? Is it? There we go.
Did you turn it off?
You just can't point.
You can use this one too. I have them plugged in.
That'll work. Thank you.
Take two, they're small.
Okay, Martin Montalvo, Oregon City Public Works Operations Manager. Thank you for having us this evening, as John mentioned earlier. This study was to meet the legal requirements under a settlement agreement between us and between the City of Oregon City and Clackamas River Water. There are two deliverables that came from this product. The first of them is the engineering analysis technical memo, or the white paper, that basically outlines what's the direction, what's the course that we're going to be taking. The initial attempt at this was to address how are assets supposed to be transferred and how is an entity supposed to be made whole when assets are transferred. In the course of this, CRW and ourselves sat down and we said, we're going to go at this together. There are several other issues that we should be talking about if this is going to happen in a smooth transition. And so we wrote the scope to help us address some of the other future growth and boundary issues that we'll be facing. As part of the agreement, the only thing that really we have to do is the remuneration, or basically how you make somebody whole, how you pay those assets that you've assumed, which will be a large portion of the discussion this evening. The remuneration policy and the model that goes with it is extremely technical. We're not going to bring that up unless you want to go through an extremely extensive spreadsheet.
No.
Yep, didn't think you would. But we'll give you the details of it to kind of give you a level of satisfaction that we've vetted it. And the good thing is CRW and the city both agree to it, okay? And then we'll answer any questions on any of the talking points that we have for you this evening, so feel free and stop us at any point so we don't lose you in the train of thought. The other thing that we'll add is, again, this is part of that 2016 settlement agreement. Under Oregon state law, there's certain ORSs and guidelines that say that when a city withdraws or assumes another territory's assets, that certain steps are supposed to be taken and certain policies are supposed to be followed to make sure that those entities become whole. This goes a little bit beyond that because it also allows us to come to a mutual agreement on how that's supposed to be done. Okay. With that, I'll hand it over to Brian Gintner, who's our lead for this project. He's done a great job as PM.
Quick question, Martin.
Yeah.
So I see on bullet point 3, it says assets necessary, blah, 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 regardless of whether they're located within the city shall remain in the district system. So will CRW be subject to our right-of-way fee if they have systems in city limits?
So I'll let John answer that question.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question too, Mar. I thought that as part of city limits and urban growth boundaries that the city wasn't allowed to extend services beyond the city limits.
We'll get into that a little bit when we start talking about joint users.
Okay.
Okay? So with that, Brian?
And you are?
Brian Ginter with Murray Smith and Associates. Excuse me, Murray Smith.
Murray Smith.
The study focused on 8 dual interest areas, essentially areas along the south and eastern limits of the city. These are areas along the boundary of the UGB and areas between the city limits and the urban growth boundary where the city has the right to annex and withdraw, and Clackamas River Water currently has customers and infrastructure. Again, the objective of the study is to develop recommendations for the elected officials to consider. So we're looking at three things: the fair methodology for reimbursement of withdrawn assets, that difficult to say word, remuneration policy, clearly defining the likely future service area changes, and then identifying opportunities to minimize redundancy in parallel facilities. And we'll go through all three of those pieces this evening. So kind of starting at the end here, this is a summary of some of the statistics relative to this study. And so first we're looking at the potential number of customers that could be transferred from Clackamas River Water to the city through this work. And so first we looked at the South End area. There's about 334 services that can be transferred. The rest of those 8 areas have a little under 200 transfers. So about 500 of the 4,000 customers that CRW serves south of the Clackamas River could potentially be transferred. And then there are a number that we identified would remain with Clackamas River Water potentially because of the challenges for the city to serve.
So I should enumerate here that this is existing customer transfers. It does not account for potential growth. It doesn't account for development within our boundaries or potential annexations. These are individuals right now that are being serviced by one of the 2 entities.
But to be clear, if somebody's trying to build something inside our UGB but outside of the city limits, they could get water from CRW, but they would not, would they have to be on a septic? And would that be approved?
They would have to be on septic. Whether it would be approved or not is a planning question that I can't answer.
Well, yes, we have instances where we've served folks outside the city limits. And typically they're on septic. If they're
Okay.
on, sewer is typically where we require annexation.
Right.
And for little onesie twosies, that's the case. I thought you were referring to a large-scale development that wanted to bring in several parcels at one time. Most of those will be handled through an annexation.
Certainly a concern of mine.
Yeah.
Typically what we see, if you have a DEQ failure of a septic field, you're within 300 feet of a sewer line. We have to extend for health and safety reasons, but then we usually get an agreement to not remonstrate against an annexation or to move forward with annexation, but we provide the service to alleviate the safety hazard.
Okay.
The water question's more complicated, and we have some slides that are going to do a pretty good job of laying that out.
One quick more question. Is it CRW's requirement to bring the water just right up to the property line, and then it's the homeowners or property owners' responsibility to bring it to where they want to go on their property?
Typically.
Is that just, okay. Just
We
curious.
provide the main, and then we negotiate on where the lateral is supposed to go to bring it onto the property.
Okay.
So similar table here now looking at infrastructure. So Clackamas River Water south of the Clackamas River has a little over 675,000 linear feet of pipe. About 100,000 of that is potentially eligible for transfer for withdrawal by the city. And of that, as we talk about the remuneration policy, about 30% of it, 13,000 feet, have some remaining value associated with them that the remuneration policy would apply to. However, once the remuneration policy is in place, it's likely that Clackamas River Water will invest further in a number of those pipelines that are aging and have no value left, upgrading them so that as the city withdraws, they go from being a liability to an asset. So, running through the findings of the study, the first is that transitions should minimize customer impacts and benefit the customer base. This really is largely around current Clackamas River Water service to isolated customers.
Back up.
Oh, thank you. So this image here highlights some examples of that. So this is on Central Point Road, and the 2 orange lots that are being pointed to there represent Clackamas River Water customers that are entirely surrounded by city service areas. So within the city, in one case, it's even annexed within the city, but it's still a Clackamas River Water customer. The one with the purple line around it, the purple dashed line, it has not been annexed, but again, entirely surrounded by city service. And so CRW continues to read the meter and maintain that service, but for all intents and purposes, they're utilizing city infrastructure and really should be withdrawn.
Are there any improvements on that property?
No. So there are single-family residential lots. They basically are islands within the city, which is one of the first things that you'll see that we're going to try and tackle with one of the work products from this is what we refer to as joint users. The joint users are typically two situations, one where there is an Oregon City main that is feeding a CRW customer off of said main, or a CRW main, which is feeding a Oregon City customer. So we'll try and come up, we have a proposed deliverable from this, which we'll bring to you at a later date, that lays out an IGA for us and CRW to follow to take care of these little onesie-twosie problems that are all over the city.
How do they get there anyway? I mean, it's...
Sins of our fathers. I'm not going to take responsibility
Back when I
for
was
it.
on the city commission the first time, we annexed all the islands.
There's still several out there. Yeah. So a lot of these we'll try and address through the IGA agreement. The other thing that helps us with that IGA agreement is instances where somebody's paying their water fee, but they're not paying other subsequent city service fees that they're supposed to be paying. So that IGA will help us address that.
But I guess what I'm trying to say, Martin, is how does this person become a CRW customer, but is surrounded by Oregon City infrastructure?
So at one point, when that parcel was there and nothing else was around it, CRW had a responsibility to provide them water service. They did. Everything else around them came into the city and was annexed, but they were not forced to annex into the city, and the city has basically developed around those.
So there's CRW infrastructure was there to that site, and then did we take over the CRW infrastructure then?
In some instances, we've got dual mains located in areas.
Okay.
That's one of the efficiencies that the slides will go into, is areas where we can say, why do we both have parallel mains running down the same street? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And eliminating those and creating efficiencies for both of us.
Okay.
The other thing to point out in this slide, so for that customer that is currently outside the city limits, for the city to withdraw and serve, your current policy requires charging 150% of the in-city water rate to those customers. That was one of the hurdles that was identified in the study in terms of making that transition because it is an impact to customer as part of that.
Yeah, it was a concern for both the customer. It was also a concern for the water provider, which in this case was CRW, and they were concerned that was too high. Too much to ask.
The next item is that CRW investment in improvements is discouraged without a reimbursement methodology. So highlighting that. Here, we're in the south end area, within the black circle. You see lines in green that are Clackamas River water pipelines. Lines in light blue are jointly owned, and the dark blue are Oregon City mains. And a number of these mains for Clackamas River water are old and have reached the end of their service life and have become challenging. For CRW, the challenge is to replace the main requires a significant investment that ultimately, if the city annexes and withdraws, would result in a lost investment. So the remuneration policy really encourages CRW to go through, make those replacements, and for the city and CRW to share in the value of that asset as withdrawal occurs and transfers happen.
So
Question.
Go ahead.
These old aging steel pipes, are they being replaced with PVC pipe?
In most cases, if it's as a main, it's ductile iron.
It's whatted?
Ductile iron,
Okay.
which is really the industry standard and what our specification calls for, dependent on the size.
And does the aging steel have any impacts on water quality or safety?
Generally not a water quality impact. From a safety standpoint, no, they typically, as they fail with slow leaks, pinhole leaks that have to be dealt with. Occasionally, if it's a significant leak, it can have an impact on the roadway it's underneath.
But the best way to kind of describe this scenario is you've got old pipes that are out there. CRW knows they need to be replaced. We know they need to be replaced. And the impetus was never there because they said, well, you're going to be coming through here and annexing this soon anyway. Why should we replace it? We're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and we're not going to get it back. what the remuneration policy allows them to do is say, we've got some sort of guarantee that if we make an investment, a certain percentage of that in some point in time will be recouped by the agency that invested. So it makes them whole. I can tell you from speaking to our counterpart over at CRW, they are already making plans in the next round of capital improvement projects to address several of the failing pipes that are in these border dispute areas that have been an issue for both of us, assuming that the remuneration policy is adopted by all parties.
So Martin, for those situations where they do not upgrade and we take on ownership of the asset, do we view it as a negative? We devalue
Very
it
good question.
significantly?
That was a lengthy debate, and we made the argument that an asset has both negative and a positive monetary value. Within the model that we developed, and I'm not going to bring it up for your own sanity, it takes into account the age, the structural component of the pipe, so whether it's steel, whether it's asphalt cement, whether it's ductile iron. It allows us to use pre-agreed upon engineering estimates on what's the value of a steel pipe that's 60 years old. And we can plug these into this financial model, and it gives us out a value that says this is the positive value. It will never give you a value that it's a negative value, but it will give you a value that says it's worth zip. And what Brian will go into is the large majority of these, it's not a huge sum in terms of financial transfer, assuming CRW doesn't come in and just start replacing everything right away, which in the long run isn't a bad thing for all of us. And in the long run, financial compensation for new capital investment is probably a fair thing to do.
Does the model take into account the water that's lost through these?
No, it does
aging?
not.
Okay.
But water loss is an issue for both parties, and we have to report it to the state. We know there are water loss issues that these areas kind of contribute to for both parties, and we want to address it.
The next item is that necessary infrastructure is not eligible for withdrawal. And so just to highlight an example of that, this is south of the Park Place area, Country Village Estates, Greenfield and Country Village Drive. The light blue pipe in this illustration is a critical supply main for Clackamas River Water, supplying from their South Fork Water Board master meter at Anchor Way down to the Henry C. and Beaver Creek area for them. And so while the city may annex and withdraw this area, the infrastructure, that pipeline will remain a Clackamas River Water pipeline. And so for the city to serve, you would have to build separate infrastructure parallel to them in that location.
Basically, it's what it's saying is service mains are on the table. Critical mains that feed an entire reservoir, as an example, those aren't on the table. Those would not transfer. And rightly, we probably wouldn't want them.
And then the last kind of point of agreement through the study was that parallel infrastructure should be avoided if possible. This is the Leland-McCord area. This one's a little bit more complicated, but fundamentally, as development is occurring and the city is annexing and withdrawing the area, there's opportunities here to avoid parallel mains like were constructed in Leland. So the idea here is that if CRW is replacing mains and building new infrastructure, it should be coordinated so it's sized appropriately, and as the city annexes and withdraws, the remuneration policy can be applied and you don't end up with two pipes in the street, one of which ultimately isn't used.
So this is the Leland Road corridor area. We've had some recent development out of that area. You'll see the blue and green line on the bottom. That was developer constructed main. There's an area between those two dashed blue and green lines where there's an old CRW main. That's basically the weak link in between those new connections. That's the area that I'd referenced that CRW is looking at investing in for replacement. The other potential, and we've talked about this in the study, if a developer comes in and makes an improvement, that is not something that the city will compensate CRW for. So if it's a development-driven improvement that was required as a condition of approval, the city does not pay for that because CRW never paid for that asset.
So jumping into the findings, out of those agreements. Service transfers should be coordinated with annexation. That's the point we talked about earlier. We don't want to leave those Clackamas River water islands in place. That's not good for the city. It creates customer confusion, and it's not good for the district to be providing service inside the city to these island customers. Joint users and master meters can be used as interim steps in the withdrawal process. And to highlight what we're talking about here, this is again back to the south end area. So Salmonberry is a good example, the area in the circle here, where Clackamas River water provides service inside the city limits, currently mostly inside the urban growth boundary, outside the city limits, where the Clackamas River water main is actually connected at both ends to Oregon City mains. So that green line is supplied by Oregon City piping, but there are CRW customers there. Those are joint users. So rather than having an expensive master meter in place, the water's supplied there. CRW reads the meter, they reimburse the city for the cost of the water at that location. Now, master meter, now in the same area, here's a location where the joint user concept didn't make sense and a master meter makes more sense. So here, the Clackamas River water line extends south and south end out beyond the urban growth boundary. And so likely that area won't be, well, the area beyond the UGB won't be annexed and withdrawn, can't be. And so a master meter makes sense here in that CRW is responsible for the main and all of the water supplied through the master meter beyond that point.
Dashed black line is the urban growth boundary?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on the concept of a master meter. So a master meter, basically a large scale meter that's the end of a main that, same the way you would meter what goes into an individual house, we're metering what is transferred to CRW through our infrastructure. They're extremely expensive.
Yes.
And limiting the number of them and the complexity of having to service them is a benefit to all.
When you say extremely expensive, what do you mean?
The meter to your house is about $140 to $160. Master meter, probably about 10 to 20 scale over that, depending on the size.
The next item is that limited CRW service within the city limits may be appropriate, and this is largely high elevation areas. And so the Holcomb Outlook Park Place, what we'll refer to as HOP area, is a good example of this. This was a partnership that began in the 90s and continued on to today. As a nice example where it does make sense. So we're essentially up in the Barlow Crest area here, and let's see, so the city limits, again, is the purple dashed line. There's shared infrastructure supplying this area, a shared reservoir. The Barlow Crest Reservoir is at that site. Clackamas River Water is a pump station that pumps out of that reservoir that serves higher elevation areas, essentially the areas in green within the city limits. In order for the city to provide service there, the city would have to construct another pump station parallel to that to serve those customers. And so as we went through the study, it made sense that we would look at that as a location where Clackamas River Water would continue to serve customers inside the city limits because the infrastructure is already in place and required for them.
This is one of the instances where logistically, financially, operationally, it made sense for all parties to agree. Not in every instance is the city or South Fork Water Board the best provider for water services within our boundaries. It would be extremely expensive and logistically very difficult to say the city is going to provide services for this location in the short term and possibly even the mid-range term.
So what happens if something happens to that light blue water main and it needs somebody to fix it?
So we have joint agreements as to who's servicing what that are already in place.
Okay.
So ownership and responsibility for maintenance are already defined under the existing HOP agreement that defined all of this.
All right.
And then building on the success of the HOP area, there are areas where future development and infrastructure needs could benefit from further investigation of shared infrastructure. And the example of that really is the Beaver Creek concept plan area for the city and the surrounding Henry C. Ridge Beaver Creek area that's served by Clackamas River Water. Quite simply, both utilities would need to build new transmission, new pumping, and new storage to serve those areas long term. And so what we'd be talking about is that there would be parallel transmission, parallel pumping, parallel storage. It creates an obvious opportunity where there may be potential for shared savings for both utilities that should be investigated. There's a couple other locations, Redland Road from Anchor Way, and then on Beaver Creek Road, interties between the two pipelines where there is already existing parallel infrastructure. So some nice opportunities to continue upon those historic collaborations that have been successful. So addressing each of these points has led to some agreement. So one is the areas of obvious transition. Dealing with the islands is really a pretty straightforward process that should happen as soon as possible. There's areas where the process is going to take longer and the remuneration policy is important. And we highlighted South End several times because that really is going to be something that's going to take quite a while for those annexations to occur, for withdrawals to occur. Clackamas River Water needs to deal with the infrastructure that's there. So the remuneration policy will provide significant benefit there. And then with that, I'll jump into the remuneration policy before coming back to the third point. So, it was a specific requirement of the settlement agreement. This is unique in Oregon. It's not typical to have this kind of remuneration policy in place for territory withdrawals. It's often a point of conflict for water districts and cities. So the key objectives are a fair methodology that's objective and easy to apply for staff. We don't want consultants to have to come back and do that work for you. You want to be able to use the model and apply it. To be able to input real data, project cost if available. The nice thing is Clackamas River Water has really good records of those historical projects that they've done. And so while we have the option to deal with places where we don't have costs, we do have a number of original project costs to use. And then be able to apply those agreed upon inputs when the real data isn't available. It was developed in coordination with engineering management and finance staff from both agencies, and our financial subconsultant, SCS Group, worked on this. They've done work for both Clackamas River Water and for the city, including SDC, where a system development charge work on multiple utilities. So we looked at the cost, market, and income method. I'll quickly hit on those. We used the cost method ultimately, and so basically we're looking at the real cost of the infrastructure that was built. Market method isn't common because you don't see the sale of public water systems very often, and so there isn't much of a market for that for comparables. The income method ends up looking at the income potential associated with the customers. That's very subjective and complicated, and so we went back to the cost method. It's very consistent with what we do when we look at water systems in general. We're using original cost less depreciation. So essentially we're going to go back to the date it was built and then depreciate it over the life of the asset to reflect that there's a loss of value over time. We look at the lifespan of the pipeline, the pipe cost and design cost as a percent of construction where we don't have original cost. And again, we had original costs for a number of the pipelines, and so we didn't have to apply many factors to that.
So what is the average lifespan of a ductile iron main?
75 years for ductile iron.
Okay.
So within the model, just kind of give you guys an example of how the model works. So let's say CRW has a project, they have the CIP files. They say, it cost us $100,000 to build this 1,000 feet of pipe 50 years ago. The model allows us to say, when we know the cost, punch in that cost. And then you say, what is the type of pipe? So if it's ductile iron or steel or one of the other types, you define that in the model. Say how long it's been there. And then what it calculates is what is the depreciation value on what is the anticipated lifespan for each of the respective types. What's the cost comparison to what we call normal. So normal is an 8-inch pipe. If it's greater than 8 inches, then the cost should be a little bit higher. If it's less than 8 inches, the cost should be a little bit lower. Takes all those variables into account that that an idiot like me can punch in, and I've done it, and it gives you a value of what that pipe should cost 50 years later. So what it would cost us to buy it from them now. In some instances, it's a positive value. In some instances, it depreciates to zero. So I would say in most instances we've actually run all of the scenarios. Several, majority.
About 70% of all the piping that's eligible has zero value at this point.
Yeah. See, and my concern with the methodology is that zero value threshold. And my concern is that I like the idea of the transfer of assets involving a remuneration policy that gets it done and upfront. I even like the shared infrastructure policy because that clears the table and the costs are set and shared. My concern remains that I don't want to inherit a major project where it's not zero value, it's negative $20 million. And I don't care if there's, and I'm not going to, I'm confident in this team. I'm just challenging the methodology that says, hey, if this thing is a negative $20 million and the total value of the asset is $80 million, we need to make that $20 million adjustment because we're about to buy a major project.
Go ahead.
So two things. One, the remuneration policy should and will, we believe, encourage Clackamas River Water to address those liabilities because they are liabilities for them today and they will remain that until the city does annex and withdraw. So first step is that encouraging Clackamas River Water to address those is important so that they're putting capital dollars to it because that's costing them today in terms of repairing leaks and addressing problems. The other piece is that if ultimately they don't replace the main as the city annexes and withdraws, you always have the option to leave that liability in place and you would construct a new main in parallel. If CRW constructed it, you would be paying for that value. You could alternatively build a new main in the road, leave that one in place. And so there is limits in terms of you need to encourage Clackamas River Water to construct, but you're not required to take the liability on.
There's nothing in here forcing us to take on a lemon.
I voiced my concern.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, we anticipated that scenario, and it was expressed amongst all the parties. And I can say from the areas that we've looked at, there aren't any major $20 million issues. There are some areas which we say this needs to be addressed that CRW they weren't prepared to invest the capital that needed to be done in those areas until they had some sort of assurances that they weren't going to be using their rate dollars to lose them. And they're moving towards that now.
So when you reach an impasse and you challenge the relative value of an asset, is there a way to conduct an inspection to emerge from the world of theory into an actual, here's what we see?
Is that what this calculator does?
No, that's pure theory.
No, it's actually
this is
based
an
on
agreement.
accepted engineering values. Yeah, and we've all agreed
That's
to
a
it.
textbook value. It's not like we ran the device through the pipe and said, you know, I know what it should be, but guess what? It's actually deteriorated 20% past that.
I think with this policy, I mean, you could always do that, right? Remove a section of the pipe, get a coupon.
Well, I don't want to do it unless I feel
analyze it, but I think what this does is acknowledges that we're talking pretty large numbers across the overall basin, trying to avoid that kind of analysis, just because it's the kind of thing that we're gonna get back into, and there'll be, I can see it now, a couple engineers in the office fighting over whether it's worth 0 or worth 10. And so I think we can do that, or we could do that, but with this policy, we're not proposing to do that.
What we've done here is keep the lawyers out of it.
We're hoping to keep the lawyers.
Good luck.
It is generally pretty black and white. Steel pipe generally has reached the point where it has zero value. Asbestos cement pipe has reached the point where it has zero value. The gray areas are 1970s cast iron pipe. There's not a lot of that here. For the most part, we have two extremes: relatively new mains that have obvious value, were constructed to appropriate standards, and then mains that have reached beyond the end of their service life.
Yeah. And the good thing is the standards that we've all agreed we're going to apply with are adopted industry-wide engineering standards, and neither of the parties would have any reason to say, well, I don't trust that number.
So we committed to 30 minutes and we're at 40, so maybe we can move this thing through. Yeah.
So the model was developed and tested by both agencies to make sure that they could run it ultimately. I did run through this a little bit already, but essentially the Beaver Creek area remains a long-term dual interest area. You have a mix of city limits inside the urban growth boundary, outside the city limits and urban reserve. There's a need to build infrastructure for both agencies, so there's opportunities if desired to pursue some shared infrastructure there. And so we've looked at that only at the 100,000 foot level. So if desired, the next step would be to pursue that further and look into it in terms of more details, understanding what that shared infrastructure could look like and what the savings could be.
Just quick, this is an issue that we need to address as we see the Beaver Creek concept area expand. we need to focus on this, and we need to reach agreement with CRW, or we need to reach an agreement to do it on our own. One way or another, we need to get moving on this one, because it's going to start impacting our ability to develop out there.
Go ahead. So what are the next steps? This work session was going to give you guys a little bit more face time with what the study's developed and the major key points from it. The deliverables that will be coming from this are things that staff will be working on. So us and CRW are jointly going to prepare an intergovernmental agreement saying we've all looked at the remuneration policy, we've all agreed to the basis for it, and then it'll be approved by all parties, and then basically we'll take that as settlement for the suit that was filed between the two parties. The next step behind that is a joint user agreement. So there's already a template out there that CRW uses with the city of Milwaukee that we like. We intend to work with them to make some changes to that. We call it the Milwaukee Agreement, but it will be our joint user agreement that defines how are we going to deal with these little onesie twosies that are all over the place, these little islands and border disputes. That will help us both in the operations side, utility billing side, and help clean up a lot of these little boundary issues. Finance, so Wyatt and his team are working on a wheeling charge study. So they're the leads on that, and they're working with the financial team at CRW. You should be seeing that sometime in the next few months. I'm not sure, I won't speak for Wyatt, but I say within the next 5. Oh, there he is. Hi. Yeah. Sorry, you're behind this head here. So within the next 5 to 6 months at the maximum, I'd imagine, for getting that settled. South Fork Water Board will be working on supply agreements jointly. That's something that as we start talking through these Beaver Creek and expansion areas, figuring out who's going to be service provider for those and at what time will those issues be addressed. So that's more of a long-term planning issue. The service transfer process is something that we'll be working on jointly with CRW, and that to some extent will be handled when we talk about a lot of the joint user issues, but it will also be talking about when we look at further larger scale annexations and transfers of property. And then the extraterritorial service charge, Brian had alluded to that and John had alluded to that. Currently, if you live outside of the city limits and you ask the city for water, we charge you 150% above base rate. And it's become an issue for CRW with investment saying, well, now you're going to pass on this financial surcharge over to the customer who really needs water. So we've agreed to open up the table for discussion on that. So those are the next steps. After that, we do not have anything for you outside of some, I already mentioned all of these in the table. So any other questions? We'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I was just thinking back about our relationship with CRW years ago, and this has come a long way. So thank you guys for mobilizing this, and it's been a long time, so I appreciate your efforts, sir.
I think that was more politics than staff.
Well, whatever it was, it was there.
I tell you, we worked very hard on this. This has been going on for over a year. I'll give credit to Bob George and to Mr. Highgarten over at CRW. They have been good partners, both operating in good faith with us. We didn't agree on everything, but I think everyone got to a product that we can all agree to.
And that's the definition of compromise.
Yep.
Anybody else?
I'm encouraged to see that there's an incentive for CRW now to invest in improving their aging infrastructure. As I see the snowpack reports come out last week that we're, 80% of normal, and that's probably going to be a trend into the future. We need to be much better stewards of the water we do have.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good.
Moving on, next up, 18-131 Tourism Strategic Plan Draft Presentation. Mr. Underwood.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really excited tonight because we are at the pinnacle point of our efforts in putting together a citywide tourism strategy. We've brought Coraggio Group on, our consultant, in June of last year, and since that time they've been able to help us put together a great group of stakeholders and they've been able to facilitate the process throughout the past year or 10 months or so with the stakeholders. This process has been very involved and very participatory, and it's pretty much gone seamlessly, I think. It's been a really good process. So tonight we're going to talk more about the meat of the plan, particularly the operational structure and the financial model. And we can have a discussion on that, and then we'll give you a quick update on where we are on the experiential marketing component of the tourism plan too. And so I have Bo Bennett here tonight with Coraggio Group, who's going to kick things off for us. So, Bo.
Right. Hello. My colleague Colin was supposed to be joining me tonight, but unfortunately he injured his back and wasn't able to make it tonight. So you're stuck with just me. And I also have to start off with another apology. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that we got the year wrong on this deck. Apparently 2 months isn't quite enough time to realize what year we are in, but so sorry about that.
So, name for the record, please.
My name's Bo Bennett,
Okay.
Coraggio Group. So the last time I was sitting here, we've talked twice about the process we went through, and last time we were here, I know you were all eager to hear kind of the meat of the plan, which we're going to do. But I want to talk about the process real quick first before we get into it, because I think there's something important that Eric touched on. Is we've been doing this since June when we first sat down with city staff and started talking about the strategic plan for tourism. And I'm not going to go through every detail here, but we've done a couple of community surveys. We've had a big visioning retreat, a bunch of workshops. We had a stakeholder group of about 20 people who came together 7 times to create this plan. In our first survey, we had 140 participants from around the community. When we came with a draft plan and got feedback on revisions, we had about 250 respondents. So that is all to say that a lot of work has gone into this, and this has been a big effort from the community. I'm not here to talk about my plan. I'm here to kind of channel the work of the group that developed this plan and tell you what they came up with. Also, please stop me if you have any questions as we go. I also don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide because I know we've talked you through our framework before. And we're going to go through each one of these elements. First, when we talk about strategic clarity, it's vision, mission, values, brand intention, and position. In this case, we didn't touch values because values are typically around an organization. You don't have a tourism organization yet to have values, but that's work that when you do have a tourism organization, we would recommend you do. But we skipped over that because we weren't really sure who the people we were talking about. So those are what we call strategic clarity. Those are kind of the high-level anchors that should help guide the activities of the plan. And then our strategic focus, our strategic imperatives. We have 4 imperatives, and these are our big buckets of things that we think need to happen. And then for each imperative, we have objectives, which is how we measure success against those imperatives. And then the initiatives are the next level down of what is the work that needs to happen within each of those imperative areas. It's just good to get on the same page, I think, before we get into it and definitions. So let's look at tourism strategic plan, strategic clarity. So this is our vision, right? This is the kind of the future we want to see for the world. What is the bigger picture that we're working towards? The mission, how we work to get there. The reputation, which is kind of it's part of your brand, the enduring kind of perception and emotion. And then the position, which is how are we different? What do we do that's unique? So remember, this is all coming from a tourism lens. This is not intended to be for the entire community, for the entire city, but more from a tourism perspective. So the vision was Oregon City, a proud community at the confluence of history, exploration, and prosperity. So this, I can assure you there was a lot of conversation about the words that went into this. But there was a lot of conversation about in all of this about making sure that we're inclusive of everything that Oregon City has to offer. We've got this river, this waterfalls, a huge and long history, a lot of great assets around both those things, a great downtown. So capturing all of that, both the natural beauty and the historical beauty, and also, we say a proud community and prosperity, understanding that tourism is ultimately about economic development, so we want to make sure we're capturing that. But throughout this, all of our stakeholders said we want to make sure that we don't lose what is authentic about the city and what is livable about the city, right? Tourism needs to be not just for the tourists, but also for the people that live here. And so we're not turning this place into Disneyland, for lack of a better word, right? Keeping what is unique. So the mission, any questions about the vision before I move on? Love it.
I like it.
So the mission is to promote Oregon City as a gathering place for all by providing a variety of experiences through a collaborative, connected, and enduring tourism industry. So again, tourism, we want to promote Oregon City. We want to be inclusive. And then, a variety of experiences. We're not a one-trick pony. We'll make sure, and this is something you'll see later in the plan, that our tourism industry is working together to create kind of a variety of experiences and collaborating for the benefit of everyone in a sustainable, enduring kind of way, something we're not going to burn out on. The reputation position pieces, again, this is kind of goes into our branding. So when we think about promoting Oregon City as a destination, if a visitor were to come here, what do we want them to feel? What do they want to remember about Oregon City? So welcoming, engaging, inclusive, and authentic. We whittled this down. There was a very long list. Welcoming, of course, there's this hospitality and making sure people feel like they're welcome here, engaging and inclusive, right? We've got a lot of things. It's very interesting. And authentic, right? We don't want to feel phony or try and be something we're not. Make people feel like they're getting an authentic Oregon City experience. Talking a lot, talking kind of fast. Any questions? Okay. The position, so this is kind of what makes us unique. A vibrant destination in the Portland metro area, located where the Oregon Trail ended and the state of Oregon began. Visitors are delighted by a small town feel, authentic and diverse experiences centered around heritage, outdoor and riverfront adventures near the magnificent Willamette Falls, and unique Pacific Northwest food and beverage offerings. So this one can be a little more aspirational, but we do have a small town feel. It's reflected in our downtown, and I think a lot of work has been done to kind of build that up over the years, and we want to make sure that's part of our position. Obviously, there's a lot of heritage here, a lot of heritage assets, so there's experiences around that. Outdoor and riverfront adventures, there's a lot of activity. Obviously, there's a river. I hear there's a waterfall. No, that was a joke. I thought it was funny. And then, a growing food and beverage offering. So the other thing that, just to note here, we had a lot of conversation around mentioning that vibrant destination in the Portland metro area, right? And thinking about the next 5 years, really, we felt as a group that's a selling point, right? We're a destination within a larger market. Attracting regional visitors is probably going to be our core demographic in the short term, and so that's kind of an important thing to call out. Questions for me yet?
So does that mean that the majority of your marketing efforts would be at Portland Metro visitors versus region or US?
Not necessarily. I think regionally, kind of around the region to start, but I think the idea, and I'm going to, Eric, maybe he may be able to clarify this, is bringing visitors to the Portland metro area to Oregon City, right? Just bringing Portland residents to Oregon doesn't really grow the greater state tourism economy, so we need to be mindful of kind of both pieces of that. makes sense. That's correct. Is that right? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment that
Please.
I was involved in many of these meetings and this process, and I just wanted to reassure the commission if there was any doubt that it was an amazing, incredible public process. Many people from the community and different areas of the community were involved. So I just want to reiterate that it was almost to the point sometimes where it was too much information and too much input. But on the other hand, every one of these words that you see on here, from welcoming to authentic, small town feel, collaborative, and everything was fully discussed. Coming to these few words on this page here, through that entire process was quite amazing. So I just want to thank you for guiding us through that, because there was an enormous amount of input.
I appreciate that. And yes, it was a big process. We had a bigger team than we'd originally planned, but I think that was important for building kind of momentum and buy-in. And we managed it. And I think, I said this isn't my plan, but I think it's a really good plan. I think you have the plan you need. I think it hits all the marks it should. So you should be excited about that. Any other questions about this page before we move on?
No, good job.
All right. So I said we have 4 imperatives. I've got 2 per page here, so they're nice and big so we can see them all. I'm going to go through each one kind of one by one. So build tourism leadership capabilities. So it's interesting, despite our variety of viewpoints on a lot of the words on the previous page, the group and all the input was very quickly aligned around these 4 imperatives. It's pretty obvious that these are the things that we needed to do. Building tourism leadership capabilities, it's at the top of the plan because it's the first thing that really needs to happen. Many of our conversations were around, we've talked about this stuff before. We've did a strategic plan 10 years ago and nothing happened with it. I mean, a really key piece of this is we need to build a leadership structure, some sort of organization, some sort of accountability to drive this forward. Otherwise, it'll likely stall the way other efforts have in the past. So there's a lot of alignment around that. That's why 2 of our objectives were binary. Did we develop a leadership and governance structure? Check. Did we develop a financial funding model? Those are things we need to have in place, and that's going to mean success. The other thing we measured was year-over-year increase in participation in technical education programs. So that is part of building that leadership capability is building it outside of the tourism organization in the community, kind of building more strength in kind of what does promoting tourism mean. And so we measure that by more people are participating in those programs, we're building that capability. So again, in this case, some of the initiatives are very closely tied to the objectives. We want to identify and empower a tourism leadership and operational structure, solidify and grow a tourism financing model, support tourism through technical education, and champion the value of tourism in the community. So these are the 4 things within building tourism leadership capabilities that the group felt was important. That last one, champion the value of tourism in the community, kind of links back to something I said earlier about making sure that the community understands the role of tourism, the value of tourism, and that this is not, tourism as it was defined by this group is not intended to displace the citizens of the city, but to enhance kind of the livability of the city. And that's, in many the destinations we work with, there's some tension there between the tourism industry, who they want visitors, that's where they get their revenue, and the locals who feel like tourists just bring traffic and noise and trash, and they don't understand kind of the role that tourism plays in the economics of the city. And so it's important to kind of spread that message. Questions about that one before I move on?
I guess I can ask a question. At some future point in the presentation, when we get to the meat and potatoes, it talks about leadership and governance structure, and it talks about financial funding. Are those solutions identified downstream?
Yes, we're going to talk about those in more detail.
Thanks.
So enhance the brand is another another key component, again, a lot of alignment around this is really around marketing and branding the city. If we're going to promote it, we need to define kind of who we are, what our message is. A lot of the elements we talked about, kind of what our reputation is, what our position is. So establishing those brand guidelines is, again, a binary thing, right? We're kind of starting from scratch on a lot of the stuff. Let's get those brand guidelines established, and then we're gonna, once they're established, we're gonna baseline, I mean, we're gonna start measuring and then develop a plan or develop a metric for increasing brand awareness in the city and in the region. So develop and improve Oregon City branding, activate a citywide branding campaign to strengthen a connection among local assets and businesses. So this is, we've got our brand, we need to get it out there, get people using it. Is it stickers in store windows, signage in the city? That's to be determined, but that's what I mean by a branding campaign, is getting people engaged in the idea of Oregon City tourism as a brand. And research and then define the Oregon City visitor. So who's coming here? What are they coming here for? Who could be coming here? Or what are given what we have, what kind of people should we be marketing to? So doing some more research about who our customers are and can be. Questions there yet? All right. I'm gonna move on. Our next imperative is coordinate tourism assets through collaboration. So, again, there's a lot of existing kind of tourism infrastructure here, and how do we get those groups working together more closely? One of the big things that came up was opening hours. We've got different museums and different sites that are, some are open on Tuesday from 1 to 4, and some are open on Thursday from 8 to noon. And, you know, if you're a visitor coming here, it's a very disjointed experience where you may try and visit multiple sites, but only one of them's open. So one of the ways we're going to measure that is making sure that if the assets are working together, we would see an increase in the % of shared common opening hours, that being identified as kind of a key thing that needs to be addressed. And then baseline and increased participation in cross-training and collaborative events. So one of the areas that was identified was promoting this every site as a visitor center, in quotes, not literally a visitor center thinking. And that means if I go to a coffee shop, are they gonna tell me about all the great things there are to do in Oregon City? Oh, if you're interested in that, you should go here, you should go there. You should go up and walk on the promenade. Thank you. And so opportunities amongst all the different businesses and assets to kind of share their story with each other and cross-promote, because the more of that happens, the longer people stay here, the more money they spend, and then we get their money, which is a good thing. So that's how we're going to measure it. Develop a plan to coordinate opening hours, ticketing, and brand collateral. So this is kind of trying to create a more unified experience for assets. Convene a working group of assets and business operators to share best practices and resources. So just getting a group of all these people who are in the tourism business together and talking and understanding how they can leverage each other for mutual benefit. If that's space or assets, or I have a graphic designer and you don't, right? How do we work together? And making that an ongoing thing, because we found there's opportunities like this where people get together, but maybe not kind of an ongoing collaboration. And then I mentioned promoting every site as a visitor thinking, right? So how do we cross-train people on what other assets, what other activities there are to do? Questions on that? All right. Cultivate and curate a portfolio of experiences. So when we say a portfolio of experiences is kind of beyond just, I'm going to go to a museum, but what is the experience? What does my day look like? What are the things to do? So those are the things that are really going to be marketable and really drive people here. So growth in visitor spending is one of the ways we're going to measure that. That's right. If people are coming here, how much are they spending? Are we are we driving that revenue generation? Like I said, if we're doing a good job at marketing and promoting the brand, more people should be coming here and they should be staying longer and spending more money, and so we should be seeing that growth. Increasing the number of itineraries published by third parties is a direct link to create or leverage regional travel itineraries to drive awareness. So I don't know how familiar you are with this concept, but I'm going to explain it to you anyways. It's very common for destination marketing organizations, travel promoters, to create an itinerary. Here's a sample of what you could do for a day or 2 days or 3 days in this destination. And so creating those and then pushing them out and getting a travel magazine or a website to pick that up and publish it as, hey, here's a great itinerary that you could go spend a weekend in Oregon City. So it's kind of that earned media piece, or unearned. So inventory and assess existing tourism assets and experiences for tourism readiness. This is about, let's just make sure we're clear on not only what we have as far as tourism assets, but where they are. Are there things that need some work, that we need to work with either infrastructure or training, whatever needs to happen to kind of get certain assets ready for tourism. Develop a plan to promote existing experiences and activate new experiences. So this is some of the work that we've already started on with the experiential marketing campaign. And then assess and prioritize infrastructure. Parking, wayfinding, et cetera, are required to enhance tourism readiness and experience. So this is something that, again, there's a lot of conversation about. If we start publishing travel itineraries that start bringing tour buses here, are we ready for that? Do we have parking? Do we have signage? Do we have all the things we need in order to support visitors?
I have a question about the itineraries published by third parties. Social media is increasingly becoming part of how people get information about tourism. And when you say published by third parties, it sounded more like you were talking about tourism magazines or travel destination organizations, not so much people having a great time in Oregon City. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this was a little more formal, the thinking behind it, than just people tweeting or Facebooking that they went to Oregon City and did this cool thing. That's definitely a metric that should be measured. That's going to kind of be people doing things and promoting it. But this is kind of more geared at tour operators and kind of industry rather than you and I. That's definitely part of the marketing the city as a tourism destination for sure.
So, Mr. Bennett, in that same vein, following up, is there any intention to develop a website? Because it's a powerful thing. You can count your number of hits. You devise it correctly. People might find a place inadvertently by doing a web search.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, explicitly, it's not spelled out, but the citywide branding campaign, enhancing the brand in that branding, and also promoting existing experience and activating new experiences. I mean, an online presence, I think, would be required in those.
Because I know some of us are well aware of the value of how a website is constructed and its ability to generate hits. So I think that would be key for the out of the area.
Okay, any other questions? So if you take those last three sides, roll them together, this is our one-page strategic plan. Our perspective as Coraggio is a plan should be succinct and one page and hit on the high notes. This is a strategic plan. This isn't an in-depth operational plan. Because very often you get these large booklets of plans that sit on shelves and nobody ever does anything with them. So we want to make sure this is at an actionable level, but also at a succinct level. So this I know.
This is everything we just saw, right?
This is everything we just saw. I'm just
move on.
wrapping it up onto one page.
Okay.
So let's talk about then, if there's no other questions about kind of this part of the plan, the organizational structure and funding. So this is a question about this. And we had, as part of our work, to do some financial projections and talk about how we could fund and structure a tourism department. So after some conversations with some folks at the city here, what we used as our kind of assumption for funding is that your existing transient room tax is essentially all that would be available for funding tourism. Not adding extra taxes. There may be opportunities to get one-off grants here and there, similar to the grant we did this year, last year with Travel Oregon. But generally, that the transient room tax is kind of the pool of money that we can expect to be able to draw from. So you see here, by year, transient room tax dollars. I think 16 is actual, 17 is projection, obviously 18, 19, and so on as a projection. To sum up, what we found in our sub-consultant who does this economic forecasting found is that your current hotel rooms are basically at capacity. We don't anticipate seeing significant additional room nights. It's just a function of the way the hotel industry works. I think it's at about 70%, and on an ongoing basis, it's hard to get above that and to count on being above that.
1 second. Why are we having any success with Airbnb and the other online as far as collecting transient room tax?
Mayor Holliday, thanks for the question. Yes, the state legislature just passed some legislation that changes the statutes to address those organizations more directly. So finance might be coming back to our commission, updating our code, although we thought we hit it the first time, but we think might have to make a quick adjustment. They've been silent throughout the state, except for with certain organizations where they entered into direct agreements, larger organizations, and they've been kind of ignoring the others. Now there's more teeth. The state legislature just passed in this session that closed last week.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good point. But as is with the other parts of my projection, kind of unknown when that would happen, right? So based on current capacity, you see the transient room tax dollars are kind of flat. The biggest bump in adding revenue, adding funds to fund tourism would be with additional hotel capacity coming online. So in this case, we just projected an additional hotel. There's 2 potentially planned hotels in Oregon City, roughly the same size, coming online in 2020 and then potentially another in 2023. I mean, this is theoretical at this point.
I think it's optimistic.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's really for illustrative purposes. Is when you think about near-term planning, you can really only count on those green bars, right? The blue bars, hopefully, that is coming soon, and that would probably provide additional funding for programming and marketing. When you talk about having 2 additional hotels, you may be able to talk about additional staff, potentially setting up an independent kind of nonprofit tourism marketing agency, a DMO type agency. But that is far enough down the road that it's hard to plan for right now. So for our purposes, we stuck with what is available given the funding from current capacity. And as these other potential properties come on, as Airbnb funds come online, we can kind of reevaluate.
The mayor and commission, if I could maybe chime in, Bo.
Yeah, please.
So nice job. And I think you're probably running on time and want to move through a little bit quicker, but I appreciated a lot of things that Nancy said about working with the work groups was fantastic. And then also your group, Coraggio, came in and walked through some projection models with us in terms of what we could accomplish. And I think to kind of hit to the point here, you can just see that baseline of around $200,000 of our existing hotel motel tax revenue. And so Airbnb is like a tiny portion. It really doesn't add to that. And what they did a good job of walking us through was what's your capacity to accomplish some of these longer term goals. So they do have, at your current capacity, you can do this. If you're able to add another hotel, which doubles almost your revenue, then you can start building into your ultimate goal, maybe 2 hotels, which is where we're headed. Then you can have a DMO down the road. So I think that's kind of where Bo's headed, which is Yeah, we're limiting our capacity now, but as we build, they've got a model for that.
Abbreviations?
Destination marketing.
Destination Marketing Organization, thank you, Mayor. So I think that was helpful to me to have you walk me through that and maybe just kind of keep it.
Yeah, that's a good point. We did kind of look at different scenarios, but again, thinking about what is realistic now, what is practical as far as moving the strategic plan forward, thinking about that 200,000 that basically we have available now. So using that as kind of the guideline or the constraint for a structure, an organization, kind of talk about what we landed on in conversations with some of the city staff. So up top there is just a reminder of kind of my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, of how the current TRT, transit room tax, is being allocated and utilized right, or how it has historically. So there is an economic development coordinator position that is funded, 25% of that role is funded out of the TRT. There's a 10% kind of that goes to the city for kind of administering that. And then the balance of that was used for grants for tourism promotion and then recently in reserves. Any additions to that?
I'm a little baffled because it seems like a lot of resources that tourism organizations typically invest in is marketing, but I'm not seeing a carve out for marketing here.
So if you're talking historically, I don't know that there was a specific carve out.
No, just talking in general, like the
Maybe I
county, for instance.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, the
could kinda
vast
jump
majority
in.
of their resources go to marketing.
Yeah, Mayor Holiday and Commissioner Mangelberg, that's an excellent point. So I think where Bo's headed here is, like in the current structure, you recall we had these grant programs that we issued. So the commission, a couple years ago, sort of put those on hold. So we've been accumulating a pretty significant reserve of those dollars in preparation for this plan, because as you're right, next step. So the current situation is we had 25% of the coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. So moving forward, I think the next part of the structure is getting into that where we have people focused on those marketing efforts. And what we've been able to do is accumulate a few $100,000 because we haven't been spending that money. So you haven't seen the effort yet, other than some things that were accomplished by DACA through some grants. But that's definitely the next step.
Yes. And so if you look at the recommended, so this is what we landed on based on the kind of recommendations of the planning team and the conversations with city staff, is that kind of keep the status quo as far as the economic development coordinator position being 25% funded by TRT, 10% to city overhead, using the balance of what's left of that TRT to add an FTE. Our last conversations, it was kind of up for debate exactly whether that be a contract position or a city employee that would be focused solely on tourism and kind of implementing some of these recommendations from the strategic plan within it, and that would leave about $50,000 in operational funds for grants and programs.
How much is this FTE going to cost?
We had a number on that, didn't we? That's got to be
80?
50 to 80, sure.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
in the
a
80
person that's
range.
focused.
50.
Yeah, because I just can see the 200,000 total, less about 50,000 for the existing economic development oversight and the process, and leaves 50 for the grants. So you're talking about in that range. So the proposal here is to hire a full-time position focused on tourism. So they're going to be coming in on their plan, doing the marketing efforts, putting forth the focus in the area, and then you have $50,000 of operating costs. The challenge is those are limited funds. Either way, any way that you slice it, you're kind of at that current level of the $200,000 total. So in order to have a person that, imagine what Bo has said they're going to be doing, they're going to be going over to the various areas that we have, EOT coordinating folks. That's going to be their job now. They're going to be focused on the marketing component and doing all these things that is the action that you want to see taking place. So now we have the resources focused. Your job is to initiate those efforts that were just discussed, coordinate amongst the groups, develop the branding, put forth the marketing, do some social media.
Whose job is that?
That's the new tourism FTE. And they're going to have $50,000 to play with. The challenge there, so that would be enough to get us kind of going on a sufficient level. From there, we get the next hotel, the next one, then we can start building in that DMO model. But right now, the funding doesn't substantiate that.
I have a real hard time adding a city employee for this. I do. I think either a contract position or maybe under, a staff person under the Downtown Oregon City Association or a chamber. But I have a real hard time adding a whole nother city bureau.
Thank you, Mayor. That's excellent input. And actually, the way Coraggio presented it when we sat down was they said you should have a contract employee. And I think Bo was just stating that's kind of, he stated that could be a contract employee or an FTE. So duly noted.
Have we visited other successful small communities with a robust tourism program? And I can think of a couple that I've been to. And we actually visit them and say, how did you accomplish this? When you go there, they've got a tourism center. The contact is recorded. The information is handed out. It's a central clearing. Is that part of this plan? Before we formalize it with another government position,
So,
how are we going to measure the success of this program, its contribution to this local economy? Because in the end, the scoreboard is dollars, right?
Yep, and we have measuring tourism spending as one of our objectives, as increasing that. So specifically, no, we did not go and interview as part of this process or discuss with other small cities. As part of our work, we do a lot of work with destinations around the country, around mostly the Western United States. This is not an uncommon model. Funding is always the problem of getting started. Many cities and communities, unincorporated areas that are promoting tourism have independent organizations, usually a nonprofit organization that is contractually tied to some TRT or some voluntary assessment. It could be on restaurants and the like. So this kind of funding, being funded by hotel nights, is pretty standard. And the type of organization, it depends. But I think the successful ones have a person. I mean, I think that is the thing, or have people. Where that person lives, so to speak, it works in a lot of different ways.
Again, Mayor and Commissioners, I think what we really need to, what you're going for here is to accentuate the bang for your buck, the steps that are going to happen next. So the problem that's occurred in the past is you have a lot of agency organizations, as you guys have explained to me, you have agency organizations, and everyone says, oh yeah, we should do that. Yeah, we should market more. Yep, we should get together, we should coordinate. So what's missing now is any resource to, your job is to implement. Your job is to coordinate amongst the different centers. Your job is to get marketing materials out there. There's no existing capacity to do that. And the way Coraggio presented it to me was, well, if we had 3 hotels, yeah, we could have a domestic or a destination marketing organization. That would be great. But with the funds that you have now, you need to get something going so that we don't end up in that same situation where we're, okay, we all agreed that we want to do something. So now we should have the energy behind this is the mission, and we need the go-to person, because I think the stakeholders are all amazing people, but their capacity to come in and say, we're going to facilitate this stakeholder group that reports back to the commission that says, we want marketing out there, we want, what are our metrics, we need somebody to do that. Contract employee.
So is there any meat on as far as this tourism stakeholder group? Is that an advisory committee appointed by the mayor to oversee this program?
Did you guys come up with how it was going to be?
No, I think we talked a little bit about that. We didn't see it as a mayoral
No,
group.
Eric, I turned to you because what we discussed is, I think there's a model that works right now for economic development.
Right, so we saw it more like a oversight committee, kind of like the Blue Ribbon Committee that we have for the Beaver Creek employment area, where the internal staff person would be kind of the steering committee that would implement the work, but it would be overseen by this basically volunteer committee of stakeholders.
And
Yeah,
part
but
of
we're
that
talking
needed-
about giving $200,000 a year of city money to some organization.
Mayor, this was discussed because part of the role of this position is to come in and define what the expectation is of the commission. This is exactly what we discussed, is you don't just hand over the money and say, so that is the expectation that we developed. We had a pretty at-length conversation about, here's some things that you had said before that you wanted to see in terms of a reporting responsibility or not, needed to be defined further.
So we as a commission, a year or more ago, tasked staff to develop this plan. And they came up with this strategic plan. And I don't think that there was any assumption in there that staff then, the current staff, would be able to absorb all of the requirements that are needed to market and present this to Oregon City with the resources that they have. I mean, it just seems to make sense to me that regardless of the scope, there would need to be more staff or a contract person.
I don't disagree with that.
And it may not be, like on your last slide, with more transient tax, that would maybe the hiring of that person or contracting with that person would be down the road another few years. But it's just something that we have to highly consider as we move forward here, because we can't absorb it in one person, Eric Underwood.
Is this your last slide?
I've got a couple more.
Well, let's get through a couple more slides. Veronica, go ahead.
I disagree with that. This is a really important initiative that is a big investment of time and money by the city, and I want to give it all the time that we need to understand it and discuss it. I don't want to rush through it.
So let's do your next couple slides and then we can talk some more.
Okay, so the last lead it, align it, build it, brand it is just kind of shorthand for your four imperatives. Build a leadership organization, get everyone aligned together, kind of start building an industry and branding it. So one of the things we did as we talked through kind of what this work looks like and started thinking about what does the structure need to be, worked with a smaller group of stakeholders to kind of line out what are some of the priorities, when could we reasonably expect to do some of this work. And this is a first pass at a high level of kind of what we could expect to be done. But through these conversations, you see that the vast majority of this stuff didn't feel like it was even really reasonable to start doing until later this year, early next year, when you had some resources on board to actually execute the work. To the point that it's just, there's a lot of stuff in here, and we heard consistently that past efforts had failed because there was nobody to lead it, nobody to take up the mantle, and nobody to really do the work. So that's why this Identify and Empower Tourism Leadership and Operational Structure was the first thing we started talking about. We started talking about the financing model. Given what you have available, getting a person on board to start organizing some of this work, doing some of the legwork around this, bringing on an advisory commission of stakeholders to keep stakeholders engaged and, where possible, leverage their involvement to drive forward a lot of this other work. And then some of these things are going to cost money. Quantifying visitor profiles can cost money. Promoting experiences, definitely, that's the marketing piece. That's going to cost money. And so this is an attempt to prioritize this work and say, where can we start? What are the things we need to focus on first? And ultimately, where do we need to spend that money? So I think this plan, it gives you a lot of direction around what are the priorities of this organization, this person, however you want to phrase it, as far as what is the work that needs to be done.
Okay. Questions?
Just a comment. Oregon City tourism is not in a vacuum here. We have a very sophisticated and valuable partner at the county, at the region, and at the state, and there's definitely opportunities to leverage our efforts and resources and visibility by tapping into those.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Hyde?
Well, I travel frequently, and I've had the opportunity to see some very successful small towns. We're all aware of Leavenworth. There's another little one along the I-5 corridor called LaConner. And I would suggest take a visit, take a look at that little town.
Where's that at?
It's right off the I-5 corridor. It's north of Seattle.
North of Seattle, okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to know how they run that, because it seems like they've got they got a visitor center. They've done wonders with their waterfront. And
Next time you're there, ask the mayor.
well, can I have your card so I can have
No,
some
just
place?
give him your card.
Leavenworth came up in our conversations, and
But Leavenworth's a major enterprise. It's been take a look at this LaConner.
okay. But I would say, I mean, as we talk about this, I'm reminded of something that my colleague Colin, a quote he said, that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And I think when you look at a lot of successful destinations, they have 20 years on you, right? They have been doing this kind of thing for a long time. And this kind of building a sophisticated organization to promote a destination and build the infrastructure, it takes time. And this is, I think it's important to remember that we're kind of starting from scratch when it comes to promoting Oregon City as a destination.
Well, the other piece of that is when your clientele arrives, you got to have your deliverables. You got to be
Absolutely.
prepared, or else it's a bust.
Yeah.
So how do we do that from the inside out? Who buys in? Who sees the benefit? Downtown business community, the historical people. The future of the city, I truly believe, is tourism related. I mean, we're no longer a mill town and won't be ever again. So how do we do this successfully? But we got to have our deliverables in place so that success breeds success.
So I have a couple of questions, and Eric, maybe you could, how many of these organizations do we have?
Tourism organizations?
Tourism / historical assets, places,
These are gathering.
A lot is all I know. I don't have a definitive number.
more than a dozen, right?
Yeah. There's quite a few.
And they all have their own little
They all
boards?
do their own thing. The little, some have boards, some have just committees or just people that run them. So it's all different.
So the one thing I see with this right away that seems confusing to me is you have the addition of a full-time employee at Q3 and a board in Q4, and that seems to be backwards. That you'd want to have whatever board or commission overseeing this program to be in place to interview and hire the full-time person. And this is not, a lot of this is going to be driven by the personality of this particular person. So this is not a just go out there on Craigslist and find the first guy you can get for $55,000 and plug him in and say, here you go. This is going to have to be somebody fairly qualified and knows what they're doing. Which is why I still think it goes back to an employee contractor of another organization that's already doing stuff like this, a marketing person out of Square One or somebody like that. The other thing, and I've said this for 20 years, and I'll keep saying it, until we have an actual destination draw, tourism is going to be hard work for us.
Yes.
So I say, if you don't have a ski slope or a casino or an ocean or, a theme park, it's very difficult to make tourism work. I mean, when you talk about Leavenworth invented themselves out of whole cloth. They said, we don't have anybody here, so we're going to build a German village in the middle of nowhere, and they worked their asses off and did it.
So, Mayor, if I may just...
I'm not done yet. So I think that if we start slow and build a small infrastructure, that we will have the pieces in place for when the legacy project and the other things that are starting to percolate in town begin to happen in 2020 or 2021. So I think rather than try to run, let's start off by walking. I would say that we spend this year looking at this, talking about it some more, developing the idea of what is the governance structure going to be, how is that going to be appointed. It really, in my opinion, must be underneath the city commission, so that there is some accountability. It needs to be, and I don't have any problem opening up the authority for the appointments to this to be by the entire commission rather than just by the mayor. So I don't have any issues with that. We can write that into the code or whatever it is and how this is appointed. But I think we have to be very careful and very selective about the people we put on this, that they are the most collaborative and the most interested in making things be a success and the least likely to be divisive and, be fighting about their own little piece of turf. Because the only way this is going to be successful is if you put all that together and you get, then those people have to go out and herd the rest of those cats and get them to come back on board and say, okay, this is the way it's going to work. So we're all going to, coordinate our opening and closing hours. We're all going to be coordinating our opening and closing days. We're going to coordinate our marketing plans and other things so that when people come from the convention center downtown, they know that if they come out on Monday, everything's going to be closed. So yeah, there's no question about when stuff's going to be here, how it's going to work. The good old-fashioned tourist map with all the restaurants and bars and museums and stuff with all the pretty pictures, that bounce out again, the numbers so that people can find the things they need to do. But I think we got to take this year to fully flesh out this before we hire somebody and start to do that work.
I couldn't agree more. I really think that we start with an inventory of assets and offerings. Apparently, we don't even know how many individual groups we have. Historical societies operate. Maybe we should convene them and see what their willingness to participate.
Well, I think a lot of this work was those different groups, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
Yes,
We don't know how
Mayor
many
Holiday- representation
Mayor
from the
Holiday and
planning group.
commissioners.
There-
I think it's important to kind of, Mayor Holiday, you stated exactly what the mission is. Thank you. That's exactly what the mission is. And I think what was missing, good job on that. And I don't know, your partner kind of took off on you with a bad bag. I get a sense of that. But here's the thing, is we talked about a couple of specific things, which are exactly what you said. One is, if we're going to bring in additional resources, we made it very clear amongst ourselves, we need to see action of these. They're going to accomplish this, so we're not going to talk about more studies. Let's just really quickly revisit what Commissioner Ide said. What Coraggio Group did, and I saw it because I just walked into the room, but I think you saw more of it, was where we were a year ago was that all the stakeholders, we weren't sure, remember there were people that were kind of upset that they weren't involved in the first place. Coraggio, I observed, did an excellent job of contacting all the stakeholders and meeting with them and building that energy up. Whether that was represented tonight or not, I don't know, but I think Commissioner Ide could speak to that. I walked into a room and saw players from the recreation area, from the destination areas, 20, 30 people in this room that were working and engaged. And so that's what you said you wanted to see, I know, Mayor, before, is like, we need to get these people in the room and engaged. So secondly, they've developed a group of kind of stakeholders early on. So there is, I know Coraggio has a list because they showed it to me. Here's all the destination organizations you have. I just don't think we have it in front of us tonight. But in addition to that, they had stakeholders from the key areas that Eric has been talking with and presented this information through, and they were all happy with it. And that's your group of folks, and you guys could throw out the names, but I think people that you'd appreciate that were there that would then help to select this person that comes in. And the reason we need to do that is because this person comes in and it has to have actionable items, and we talked about deliverables very specifically. They're going to come in and deliver. And one of the things is to develop the structure of the reporting entity that is going to report to you. And we talked about, if we're going to give away $200,000, there should be some connection to our existing commission. So that's what needs to be built. There will. And also getting the actionable deliverables done. So that's what we talked about, the position. The problem that we have is Coraggio has met its objective of getting everybody in to say, yep, we agree. Commissioner Ide could speak to that, but it seems like all of these diverse stakeholders said, we agree to this mission, this vision moving forward. Now we need a resource, because it doesn't exist now, to come in and say, okay, now that you've agreed to this vision, let's do the things that the mayor suggested. Let's get people to start talking about timelines. Let's develop the reporting group for the commission.
let's lay out the marketing plan. And those are actionable items as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I want to start by having another discussion about what this advisory committee, commission, whatever is going to look like and how it sits in the scheme of things, because I see that as important as, the planning commission as far as, if we're going to take this seriously. And it needs to have some oversight by the city commission.
But I guess from our stand, I think part of this though is that we need the resources to do that. Now, whether that's an FTE or a contractor or a consultant,
Well,
we need to start
next
moving. I think it's this whole thing though, right? Let's just start. We're at a spot where we can start, and there'll be baby steps. But we have a group that has come together and is committed to this strategy, and now it's time to start making those moves so that when we have a lot of great resources here. And we need to start marketing those. And you're right, it's not, as you were talking, it's not a huge, amusement park, but it doesn't need to be. We're starting to set the groundwork now so that, let's just say the Riverwalk does happen. When that happens, we're not starting at that point.
No,
we're already going.
I don't
and building.
disagree with you, but I think this is the first real time that the commission's had an opportunity to see the work product. We need to be able to absorb it a little bit, and we need to be able to have at least another chance or two to talk about the steps that we're going to take moving forward. So I'm certainly not, we aren't even prepared to authorize you to move forward with hiring someone tonight. But, I need some more time to absorb all this and kind of understand where it's going. I'm going to break from tradition here because Commissioner Smith's in the audience. Do you have anything you want to say?
God, no.
Okay.
I have a lot to say.
I had to give you the opportunity.
I would just like to add, it was interesting listening to you talk about all the things that we need to do. And a lot of those things about inventorying our assets and kind of starting to build this industry are what is in this plan. Yes. And those are the conversations we had. So I think that's, to me, I heard a lot of alignment around what you see is the work that needs to be done.
I don't disagree with
the
work that has to be done. I disagree in the order in which some of the stuff is going on.
And,
because my responsibility and the rest of our responsibilities is to be good stewards of the public's money. And this $200,000 tax money is the public's money. And so I need to be sure that moving forward, we have the organization in place and the right person in place to take care of this and to get the job done. Because we've had history in the past of not doing that well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And so this is a first pass at
that's
working group. And that's why we're here to talk about this.
That's why we're here tonight. It's just, we're presenting this to you. This is what we've come up with. We want to have a discussion. We want to take your feedback and refine the plan based on what we hear tonight. So, and I would like to say, because I didn't get a chance to say it a minute ago, is that, yes, we've reached out to every one of the tourism groups here in the city, and we did our best at the beginning to get representation from each one of those groups as part of the planning team. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. We got a lot of participants for that planning team covering an array of tourism groups. And so we've established that cohesiveness with this process. I think the important thing for me, since we have that and we've been working so well for the past 10 months together, I think it's important to keep up the momentum that we have. And I'll be honest, as a staff, I think waiting a year might be somewhat detrimental to do that. If we could find something that we can do to just keep that momentum going, however minimal it may be, I think that's crucial at this stage.
How do you propose we do that? How do you propose we keep the momentum going? You being the economic development person.
Well, I think we continue with the committee to come up with a way to establish a resource to implement this plan. I think we continue those discussions on an informal basis and come up with some suggestions until you talk about it next time.
And I don't have any problem with that. I want to be clear that, how big is this group? 25? 30?
Yeah, about 20, 23.
Yeah.
20 to 25, depending on the day.
That's a gigantic board.
Yeah.
And is, absolutely unhurtable. in the long run.
In the short run, it was kind of manageable.
That's true.
We have
That
a
was-
lot of
that was
passionate
the
people
group
about
that met-
tourism
That was
in
the
the
group
city,
of getting
so.
all the
One time.
stakeholders to engage in the process.
Yeah. It had its
Subsequent to
purpose.
that, you had a smaller group of stakeholders that you ran this presentation by. I think the mayor's spot on, and we just haven't communicated that directly the way we need to. I mean, I think there could be consensus from the commission to maybe allow one of you or the mayor to sit in and address what this group is, because there was the bigger group. You had to get the energy of all the players in because they said we weren't involved. We
I
did that.
understand.
Secondly, Eric, all this information was presented by a group of Fowler and there were a few folks that were key players. You kind of walked me through it. I'm sorry I don't know the names, but so the key players, it might be interesting to share that with the commission, just get them some sense of, okay, this is the direction we want for the people that will be engaged enough and make a determination, okay, bring in a resource, a contract employee, which was originally presented by Coraggio as bring in a contract person, not a city employee. Then bring them in and say, okay, well, your job is to, now that you've had people we trust with commission input if they want, to pick a person. You come in and you build this committee the way we want to see it and present it to us so we can accept that. And also, there's some other things you need to be doing, keeping the momentum going with the parties that we involve, the 25.
I don't have any problem keeping the momentum going, but I feel very strongly that Economic Development Committee or Tourism Development Committee or whatever it is needs to be a city-appointed underneath the city commission, just like the planning commission or historic review board or anybody else. And if those people are nominated by different organizations, or maybe you screen them and pick, who you think, and then we can question them and make those appointments. But there has to be a board that, makes tentative decisions for the city commission about the decisions that we're making to spend this money.
Agree, and we didn't want to be presumptuous about making that decision with any board, because this is the first time that it had been presented to you. So the action item for the employee was have this group be involved in the interview process to find somebody that's good, and then that person needs to come back and create the committee that you wanted. We had that discussion, and I actually, Eric could tell you, I said, well, I remember the mayor saying that there needed to be some accountability as we were having that discussion. But we didn't get presumptuous coming to you with, we're going to set up the committee this way. And we also need the resources to be able to design what the committee is going to look like, put that into code, align it with other committees that we have it be reporting the commission the way that we want to.
So until you do that, I could see maybe sometime in the next month or two us authorizing on a temporary basis a contract employee or company to do some of that work. But as far as making a permanent decision for long term, I want to have the infrastructure in place.
Okay. Understood.
That's just my opinion. I don't know where anybody else is. Commissioner Shaw, you haven't said anything.
Well, no, I was curious about that because when I first saw this, Q3 was going to be the full-time employee and then the board. And I thought it should have been the other way. Mm-hmm. Because this FTE has really got to know what he or she is going to be involved with and who that board is. And then so he or she comes on board, and all of a sudden then we create the board for this. I think that person, should come on board and know who or she or he is going to be working with for this board. So, and I'm all for anytime we can kind of contract things out, at least initially, until we can really show substance that says, okay, this is worth a full-time employee, PERS, everything else, okay? So.
I have a thought. I think the Oregon City branding should be one of the early deliverables. And I would advocate for having that start Q3, because a lot of the tourism efforts, the deadlines are happening in Q1 of 2019. So you need to be ready to get into the state visitor brochure or the county visitor brochure with your new logo, your new look, your new message, or else you miss a really strategic window. And you don't need a full-time person to do that. You can hire branding experts to do that for you. That can be contracted out. And it's a specialized expertise too.
I can tell you the reason it ended up where it is, is so some of that work is is part of this plan, right? Some of the kind of branding we've talked about. If you notice the second line under cultivate and curate a portfolio of experiences, develop and promote an existing experience, and activate new experiences. So some of that work is already underway with the grant from Travel Oregon and DACA. So some of that branding assets that can be leveraged later have already been created and are being created. So that's kind of one thing that's already going on that's going to contribute to that. And the other part of the conversation was, if you notice the bottom orange box, which was quantifying our visitor profiles, or as we renamed it, research and define the Oregon City visitor. In order to really refine your brand, if you're going to hire a branding firm, they're going to say, who's your customer? And so that was seen as a kind of a precursor in developing the brand, starting this year with what information we have available as kind of a first step to having that brand. So that was the conversation, and kind of how those three activities flow together. Agreeing that is important work to start, but there's kind of some other things that are, at least the defining your customer piece, that need to happen first.
Mayor Holliday.
What?
Mayor Holliday. Just, I think a point of clarification on that, just for the commission to give direction. I want to share that the issue that we had is we've had a consultant firm come in and a second consultant firm come in, and we had a point of discussion about we don't want another limited capacity consulting action thing. We want an engaged, and we can get to if we don't want to go in that direction, but we want an engaged, longer term, focused person, because we're moving from consulting to take action in branding, to take action in working with the committee. And the part that I guess maybe we didn't talk about is it seems like the folks that you might want on that board are the folks that are engaged now, not 25 of them, probably a selection of some, the right board assembly that you'd like to see, but the players that would be working with this person are the same people. So when they become the board, that's a thing. But I don't know. I think if you gave direction, I think if we had consensus from the commission tonight to say, well, okay, well, we want to see a more temporary resource mobilization and have the board established first, that would be just fine. I think the other way to look at it too, and that could be a decision, is we could have the same types of folks that have been engaged in this process, some of which are going to end up on the board, but give me a good representation of what's going to happen. Select a person to come in. I think the commission can make that determination if you don't feel comfortable hiring more of a longer term contractor employee now. But the crux of what we need is a resource, because we got, when Coraggio steps away, economic development has a function. We need a person that's going to do the branding. We need a person that's going to continue the momentum.
I know what you want.
So I guess
I'm just not ready to give it to you.
I'm asking for consensus on I think you've given direction that you would like to see a board in place before a more permanent position.
Correct.
But I wanted to share additional information.
Yeah, because I think this person not only does that person get vetted by the folks that they're going to work with, most closely, but that person also really needs to be vetted by the city commission. That's a hire that needs to be done, in conjunction with the city manager. But I think the city commission deserves an opportunity to have some input on that. And normally, I leave those hiring decisions up to you. But I think this is a completely different ball of wax, and we have never done it before. So I think moving forward, whether it's going to be a contract person or if it's going to be somebody that's under economic development, I think this is an important enough piece that we need to take our time and do it right, because like you said in the past, we've done tourism plans or waterfront master plans or parks and rec master plans that you spend $250,000 and in 6 months they go up on a shelf somewhere, and back there in the back somewhere there's a whole stack of those things that never got implemented. So if we're going to spend the money and we're going to hire somebody, whether it's a contractor or somebody else, I want to spend a little more time talking about how we're going to go about doing that.
So, Mr. Parno,
Yes, sir.
in your estimation, if we were to initiate this, an action, not a plan, we're going to start gathering resources. Understanding that it will accelerate over time and grow, does the city staff feel we do not even have the resources to kick that off on the small scale? And then we reach a tipping point where we need to hire this person, then we do it. Do you feel we can't initiate that with our own internal resources initially?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Commissioner O'Donnell. No, thank you for that question. I think it's more challenging if it's the case, and I'm actually getting the input from the mayor and the commission that says it's important to have a board established before we make a permanent commitment, and that's exactly what we can do. So we should move forward with that. And to answer your question,
I'll take a whack at that. I don't think we do. I do not think we have the bandwidth. And I think that part of the reason that we were talking about bringing somebody in was to build that momentum and keep that moving forward, is that until we have a board that's in place and functioning, or we can move to the next level of a DMO, the city's going to have to drive this for a little while. And we need that person here who can take that and drive it. Having somebody deal with it a couple hours a week with their free time that they can scrape out of the other duties that they have right now isn't going to be successful. I think that's one thing that we heard, was that until we get this up and running, the city's going to have to be a strong partner in moving this forward, keeping the group together, and driving these early victories and these early wins and these early investments until it has enough momentum and enough organizational skill and to start running on its own. And maybe, we can have this conversation and we can check in and see where we're at with the strength of the organization. Can we start to change what that organization looks like? But I'm thinking what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is that the city is going to have to be a strong, good partner in this until we can get our feet underneath us. And that's going to take a resource to do that.
My concern is that don't want to make a hire of any kind, contract or whatever, that gets here and doesn't have anything to really, a foundation to get started with. I want to establish that foundation, and I'm in tune with, if we form a committee that starts gathering these people that are going to do these deliverables, maybe there's not 25, maybe there's a dozen. Mm-hmm. And they make a decision that this is what I'm prepared to contribute. Now then, when we bring that person in, they've got something to manage. I'm not anxious to spend money that doesn't get me an immediate return.
Well, I think this would be a good conversation, right? I mean, in terms of who is managing that? Is the city managing that because they're a city employee, or are they city contract? It'd be different to turn over a contract or a city employee position to a committee. We don't have any of that in the city.
No, I wouldn't want that. I guess what I'm saying is, I kind of felt like I was being asked to make a decision tonight on something we've had very little time to talk about or gestate on or really kind of get our heads around. I think the best next step would be to take whoever your senior group is. So is it 10 or 12 or 7 or 8 or,
I think that the scope of work for this group that met the last 10 months or so, several months, that has ended. That's my understanding.
That's we can
and so
pull
they're
from
not
this group to make it a
they're
smaller,
not
manageable
expected
group.
to continue meeting. Their work is done. There may be some people on that group that would be interested in being on this board. And that's something for staff to determine.
I think the way to make me more comfortable would be to have a work session with a dozen or so of the people that were in this working group for us to be able to talk to about, how they came to their processes and how they think that an operational board, whether it be, maybe it is a nonprofit. Maybe it's not driven by city staff. But the one thing I've always seen is that you've got, at my last count, at least 20 different, museums, tourism organizations, recreational organizations, all those things. And trying to get them all on one sheet of music singing the same tune is a very difficult process. And so you got to have buy-in from everybody about, we're gonna submit ourselves to this group. And then that group submits themselves to the city commission so that we have some accountability and we can pull funds back if it's not working out the way it's supposed to. But I think this horse is dead tonight.
I have a question. Is there going to be a full report available to us at some point, or is this all we're going to see?
I guess, I mean, there are additional details. I'm not sure exactly what else you'd be looking for as far as a full report.
Okay.
I mean, I do want to just highlight that, you know, this page that we're looking at now is, you know, is the best thinking of that group the last time we met. Naturally, things are going to shift and prioritize, and to your point, I think, you know, you all need to make a decision and think about how you want to structure this organization. I do think it's important that we dedicate some resources and come up with some sort of structure to move this forward.
I understand all that.
This was not necessarily intended to be this is what anyone's telling you to do. But
And this forum is not a forum that we make decisions in.
Yeah.
So, does anybody have anything else before I move on?
I would support another work session to determine where we want to go from here.
Yeah. Okay, then we're going to take 10 minutes. We'll come back and hear about Glen Oak Park. session. We're going to we'll flip the agenda here, and we're going to hear Dr. Lewis's plan for the Urban Tinker House operations plan.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. We're here today to talk about the Urban Tinker House operations and volunteer plan. This is, as you know, a commission goal for the 2017-19 biennium to develop and implement an operations and volunteer plan for the facility. Just a little bit of background, of which I'm sure you are all aware. In 1843, moved once in 1910, and then again in 1986 to its current location on 6th and John Adams. The city conducted restoration on the project between 2011 and 2015, which included major structural rehabilitation, re-roofing, new mechanical systems, electrical upgrades, ADA configurations for entrance and bathroom facilities. We undertook additional interior projects in 2017, which included drywall installation over the shear walls, which is what stabilizes the facility for structural concerns, apply interior paint, and we began the furniture package furniture plan. Some of the furniture pieces, as you see on this slide, are in the study area and in the main area as well. The operations plan, which was conducted, consists of the strategic plan, which was conducted in 2015. The 5 main phases of the operations plan, the strategic plan laid out, which included governing structure, preparing the building for use, developing an interpretive plan, developing a fundraising plan, and developing a maintenance plan. The discussion today will focus primarily on the governing structure, preparing the building for use, and developing an interpretive plan. The governing structure consists primarily through the vision statement of utilizing the current resource of friends groups and volunteers that are interested in maintaining the heritage and telling the story of the house. As you're aware, it is a very strategic and important piece of our cultural landscape within Oregon City. We have a dedicated friends group which has been identified for many years as playing an integral role in providing the resources to provide that, to speak to that story. As we move through getting the house into a position where we could open it up to the public, it was always assumed that the friends group would have the interest and capacity to operate the house for the city in cooperation and partnership with the city. We have been notified by the friends group recently that they do not have the capacity currently to take on operation and maintenance of the house as we thought that they might, working with them over the last couple of years. So with that information in mind, we have moved forward with a recommendation to,
Oh, that was weird.
that was weird.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Let me just continue with your.
This whole system's got ghosts, man.
No, I think it was an accidental bump on the cursor there.
Try to only push the one button at a
Yeah.
time. There we go. So we're moving forward now with a full operations plan, but a short-term strategy to get the house open and operated as soon as possible, knowing that there's been considerable investment from the commission, from the residents of Oregon City. It makes sense to get the house open as soon as possible while we continue to move forward with the long-term operations strategy. So this operations plan that we're proposing is a short-term strategy in order to get the house open as soon as possible. We would like to get that work done and open the home by summer of 2018. So with that, the governing structure and interpretive plan that we're proposing would be to hire a half-time limited term FTE position. This position would be limited term to allow us to, with new information that we have from the Friends Group and they're not having the capacity to help operate the home in the short term, allow us to get the home open and operated for the community while we're continuing to work on that long-term strategy of transitioning the house operations to either a nonprofit or another organization that would have the capacity to operate the home. National Park Service, another nonprofit, or eventually the Friends of the Ermitinger House. We would utilize existing community service department budget. The budget is very thin. It's definitely a difficult decision for us to do this, but the commission did dedicate some funds to get the house open and ready for operation during this last budget cycle. So there are some funds within our maintenance budget for the Ermitinger House, which we will reallocate towards position in order to get the house open and operated. The limited operating hours, similar to what Karaji was speaking to, of lining up historical and tourism-related resources, we would align our hours with the McLaughlin House, which has a considerable marketing presence and presence in the community for tourism, and hopefully be able to play off of that visitor and be able to extend their visit over to the Ermitinger House as well. So
what are those hours?
Hours are 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. So the position would be, partial lead docent position for the facility, partially a volunteer coordinator to help get additional volunteer staff that would be able to give tours and do all the work that would need to happen at the home. Additionally, they work on marketing materials, coordinating with staff, coordinating with other stakeholders in the community to make sure that we were working towards, again, a more permanent solution. So the next steps moving forward, again, assuming that we receive direction from commission to move forward with the proposal, would be to post the job position for recreation programmer. Working with our human resources department was identified as the appropriate level of staff. We would continue preparing the building for use. We are currently implementing the furniture plan, working with a local historian that has donated both materials as well as his expertise in laying out the furniture and working on the interpretive panels and the other pieces that would be usable for visitors as they visit the home. We would, again, continue to refine and execute that interpretive plan. We do have one scheduled activity, which is a second annual Oregon City Heritage Days event, working with the Hardings and the Friends groups on a June 22nd through 23rd, 2018 Oregon City Heritage Days event, and then moving forward with the grand opening, which would be to be determined at some point, more than likely just after the 4th of July holiday. So with that, I will open it up to questions and comments.
So is the entire house furnished at this point?
The entire house is not furnished. We do have furnishings in most of the rooms. The primary spaces and the lower level are furnished with larger pieces. So you'll notice on a couple of the photos, we do have tables, chairs, wall decorations.
Is there anything upstairs?
We do have. I don't have any photos, but we have some. Some dressers, beds, wall displays. We're planning on doing additional interpretive displays as well.
Anybody else?
Is there an intention or a hope that the house could also be rented out for revenue and for, I don't know, private parties or special interests that would want to use it for an event?
Yeah, so there would be an opportunity to explore that. It's difficult with, a lot of the pieces are older in nature, 1840s. The period of significance for the home is 1843 to 1859. So most of the pieces in there are very old, and it would be and it is difficult to find appropriate pieces to house and display in the home, and so to have damage from food and drink and folks that might not be used to being in a facility like that. even the chairs and the sofa, things like that, are not meant to sit on. And so it would be difficult to do that. It's also a smaller space, so that would be a challenge as well. I think what we probably would try to start moving towards is doing more events where we're spreading the word about the Ermatinger House and the history and what type of amenity it is for our community. It was the oldest home in Oregon City. It was the birthplace of many different pieces within our story. So the coin flip for naming the city of Portland, Ermatinger actually penned a letter to incorporate Oregon City from his desk, it's thought. And so we do have a letter that's penned by him and signed by others within the community at the time. So it does play a critical role in telling that story. And it's also a unique piece in that there are older homes that tell later periods of significance. This is really, truly the only home in our community that tells that earlier period.
You said that it was a temporary position?
Correct.
And for how many months? Just throughout the summer?
I would envision that it would be a 2-year limited term position.
A limit?
2-year limited term.
Oh, okay.
Which would allow us to gauge the impact of having the home open, track attendance, revenue, be able to network with others in the community, to show what's possible at the house, and then to be able to hopefully transition to another organization that would be better suited to operate the home. It's difficult for me to, when we're so short-staffed in other areas, providing, we're probably half the number of staff that we need for our operating of parks. Our recreation program is very limited. To have a city position dedicated to this home doesn't make sense in the long term. But there has been a substantial investment by the city to bring it up to the level where we could open it up to the public, and I think it's important to move forward and to be able to open it up this summer.
Do you have a mission charge in mind and brochure or marketing, anything to kind of promote the opportunity?
Yeah, so we would work with, that's a good question. We have identified reporting structure. So Rochelle Anderholm would be the reporting supervisor for this position and go through hiring. She's pretty adept at marketing materials, working on our summer concert series and camps and other things within the community that we're operating. So she would work with the staff person once they're hired to really start digging into appropriate marketing strategy. We would obviously have an updated website. A lot of the historical pieces would be included in the home. We don't have a set price. It's my understanding that we did charge a minimal of around $4 per head previously when we opened the home, and probably would be something similar, or maybe even strategically looking at doing a donation instead to get the most viewage out of the home and request donations and friend building in that form.
Well, Mr. Lewis, in my 15 months sitting up here, I've struggled to understand the dynamics of the groups involved with Ermatinger House. And we're now 90 days away from another event that we need to do. Mm-hmm. I'm actually interested in hearing from former Commissioner Smith. I mean, is the group in accord? Or do we have a plan? Do we agree on the furnishing? Do we agree on the operation? I mean, I almost feel like the group is dysfunctional, and I don't participate in them directly. So, I mean, what do we need to do to make this a viable, moving forward, marketable attraction of Oregon City? That's the question I put forward tonight. And not piecemeal, not let's get it over. What do we need to do? And let's get it done.
And I don't think I can speak to the inner workings of the Friends group. They're not a large group. And, I think what was communicated to me was their interest in, once the home is open, using that as a leverage piece for interacting with the community and telling the story that the house should have to tell. But I don't know if you're interested in inviting them up to speak.
Well, I'm curious, do you attend those meetings?
I do not attend.
Okay, well, maybe Commissioner Smith, I want to hear about a commonality of purpose and agreement of how to move this forward.
Come on up.
So come on up, sir.
Hello, Mayor, Commissioners.
Name and city of residence.
Rocky Smith. I'm on the Friends of the Ermitinger House group, also former Oregon City Commissioner, worked in the Ermitinger House in the 90s, and have been a strong advocate for its renovation and restoration and reopening. The group's not dysfunctional so much. It's a small group. It's a small, dedicated group that has worked with this city for 20 years. That relationship has been dysfunctional. It's getting better. I think we're in a place tonight to make a start on getting the house open. I do still have some concerns. As a commissioner watching this whole process, the city never had a plan for hiring staff. The city never really had a plan for even opening the house. That was my concern all along, that we would get this house done and it would sit there. And that's exactly what has happened for the last 2 years. It's not because of a non-interest in this group to help, but over those 2 years and the 15 years before, this group has gotten burnt out. So what I am now kind of trying to do is work with city staff to how to put us, part of the problem that if we would have been able to open the house, if there would have been a plan for the city to work with a friends group to open the house the day it was completed, we wouldn't be here. But we lost the momentum. I kind of think some of the conversations about the tourism plan tonight puts us in a similar situation. So we sat for 2 years, and so all the momentum of the house being done and being ready to open was lost. And so now we're in a position where the only way to open it is to hire staff to open it. But that only is going to last for 2 years, and if that 2 years doesn't create something or create enough energy for the Friends group to grow big enough for the Friends group to take it over, then the house will close again. If there was never a plan for staff to operate the house, then I don't understand why the city is creating the what's in the house, what period the house is going to be, what the furniture is going to be, if the city had no plan to ever fully staff it for a long time. If the plan was eventually to have a nonprofit or a friends group run the house, then that friends group or that nonprofit in the future that might have taken over the house should have been involved in all of that planning, and they were not.
Well, I have to ask you a question, because none of us were here when the decision was made to do the renovation and spend $750,000.
No, I'm not talking that far back.
Well, I mean, wouldn't it have made sense to have the plans when you're making the decision to spend that kind of money to do this kind of work, to have a plan in place then? This is sort of like the South End Fire Station for me. Why build it if you don't have a plan to operate it?
Well, that was staff's job, I assume, to figure that out, and so now they're doing that. You know, I had done everything I could to put a friends group in position to partner with the city to do exactly that. But it's been 2 years since that, and we haven't really moved forward that much. I think we're getting there. I guess I think my main concern is this: if we get the house open, if there's staffing to keep the house open, then how do we make sure that that's, you know, well, it will be consistent. Will be consistent with the McLaughlin hours. But if that's all we do, if that's all the city does, I don't think in 2 years there's anything to keep it open. the Friends group has to be able to be, or whatever group, if it's not the Friends group, whatever group needs to, be there to take on the house, whether that's under the tourism or something else, has to be able to be in a place where they can do that. And that means more involvement, more money. If we can only, as a Friends group, work in the house when city staff is there, then that negates a lot of opportunities to do fundraisers at the house, to do events outside Friday and Saturday hours, which is part of the problem the McLaughlin House has right now. They can't open the McLaughlin House unless there's a park ranger there. So the house doesn't get open, and there's no ability to do extra events or extra promotions to get the house open. I really think, if this was done in a way where there was a core city staff that could keep the house open for the next 2 years, and that was added to by a Friends group doing key events, key dates that they can open, where they have, the ability or agreement with the city to be able to open the house to do that. They can then hopefully build that group back up with enough interest to maybe be in a position in a year or 2 years to be able to step in more of a role in running the house.
Hang on 1 second. Is there any reason why we couldn't do that?
I think we're in agreement. I think we're trying to create a foundation to get started in supporting them, the Friends group getting their 501c3. We offered to pay the insurance to help them out to get started. I think we're trying to build that foundation, but,
got to start somewhere.
We can either keep it closed until we figure all this out, or we can try to do something, which is what staff's brought forward, to try to get it open and start building something from there.
Well, I think that's where we're at. We can't do much about the past, Rocky. So I think what Mr. Lewis has brought
No,
forward
and I'm not saying that. I just think that, there's been a lot of effort put into the house.
Yeah, definitely.
And there needs to be more collaboration to make this happen. And I think that's happening right now, but those of us that have been involved in so long, we're tired of it. It's taken 20 years of our lives to do this, and the house is still not open. So we're getting burnt out, and we're losing people that have been involved. And when you get to that point, you can't, as a group, maintain and take care of a house by yourself. You have to get it off the ground.
And I think that's why the commission took the position it did 3 or 4 months ago, that, we either got to get it done or walk away.
Right. So I think I'm excited about it. I think it has potential, but we want to be able to keep moving forward and build on it.
Yeah. Okay. Have you approached any other organizations, Rocky, about joining or maybe becoming friends of the Ermitinger House, or somebody else like McLaughlin Neighborhood Association that kind of live around here and stuff, that there might be a couple members, a couple people, I don't know.
I've had numerous, I've had a lot of meetings with basically the Friends of the Ermitinger House group, but then I've been having meetings with city staff and the city manager about not only the possibility of the Friends of the Ermitinger House being a part of the future of the house, but what if that group can't? If the group can't now, and it can't and that group can't do it in 2 years, then what are the other options? Right. And there are other options, I think. One of them being the partnership with Clackamas Heritage Partners that already runs the End of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, that already has an agreement similar. There could be some partnerships with staff from that facility, or it could be a partnership with downtown. There's a lot of possibilities in the future that could be a partnership.
Yeah, but I think that getting it open and hiring Rochelle, who's going to be a real dynamo for him right here.
I think she's awesome.
She's awesome. So I think we're headed in the right direction here. So, I'm pretty excited about it, too.
Anybody else? All right, thanks, Rocky. So with that, I think you have clear direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. So now we'll move on to the Glen Oak Park. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much. And this is should be a pretty quick update. I know it's been a long night. I will move through this pretty quickly, and please do feel free to ask questions if you have them. Quick overview of Glen Oak Park. So our overall parks system, 38 parks and facilities, roughly 300 acres. Glen Oak Park there in the lower right-hand side. You'll notice how far away it is from all of the other parks within our system. So it's in a park deficient area, and we're very happy to be moving forward on development very shortly. Glen Oak Park specifically sits next to the Oregon City High School facility, as well as the new bus barn that's there across the street. It's on either side of Glen Oak there on the south, Myers Road, soon to be extension up there on the top, and High School Avenue on the right-hand side. It's approximately 9 acres, 9.1 acres, and has some wetlands and other things going through the property. This is the master plan concept. A lot of different pieces pointing out on this. A couple of the major items that I will point out. It has a large open lawn area, a parking lot along Myers Road of 24 parking spots. It has a paved loop pathway, children's play area, a picnic shelter. It will have improved frontage on High School Avenue with on-street parking along High School as well as Myers Road extension. And it will have our system's first fenced dog park, which is very much needed and a big highlight for community members. The phase 1 development, as we are proposing, would include things like the multi-use courts, some improvements in the wetland area, the trail system going through the playground. A couple of pieces that it would not include is the frontage improvements on Glen Oak Road. We do have a rental property on the lower left-hand side there, which we rent out and receive funds for. On the full build-out, we would use that as a community space, additional parking, and have some additional boardwalk trails going through the wetlands area with viewpoints for the nature area. So we are going to be moving forward shortly with development of Glen Oak Park. We received almost $500,000 in state park grants to go towards this development. We're very excited about that. We will pair that with roughly $2 million in park system development charges for the total budget. We should be moving forward in the next week or so with our RFP and then working on our construction documents permitting with groundbreaking next spring and winter, spring, and park completion for late summer, early fall of 2019. The one thing that we have not done yet is name the park. So Glen Oak is a kind of a working title, but it might be the final park name as well. Working with, per policy, working with our Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee representatives, as well as our CIC staff liaison position on coming up with a process of how to go about doing the naming, whether it's a public process, voting, that type of thing, or just taking suggestions from folks in general. So that is to be determined. We have our first meeting scheduled for next week. With that, I will open it up for questions or comments.
I have some questions. Could you go back to the design of the master plan? So what is a pump track? And what uses it? Is it a bike or a skateboard or a?
Yeah, it's a bike. And primarily you can use it for, scooters, things like that as well. But it's kind of a waved, takes your foot power as well as kind of the design, allows your momentum to kind of carry you through the track. It's quite a bit of fun. And can be made out of different materials. Some of them are cement or wood. Some of them are dirt. And we don't have, I would have to go back and look and see what the design called for on this one specifically. But a concept plan could be developed.
And how big is it? Is it 30 feet by 20 feet? Or?
You'll notice the basketball hoop next to it, which kind of shows the general. This is a concept plan, so it may change, but it's a smaller pump track. The basketball hoop, for size comparison, typically it's about 90 feet, would be a full court size, so it's maybe about 45, 50 feet from side to side, and maybe 30 feet in width, it looks like, for the size of the track.
I had one more question. I was looking at just the distribution, and it didn't seem like you had very many benches or picnic tables. Was there a reason for that?
We will. Those things are things that will be developed as you move forward. There's some built-in seating walls, both in the upper section near the dog park / parking lot area, as well as a seat wall near the children's playground piece. And I'm assuming we'll probably have ample benches and picnic tables. The lower section.
Have one table.
Yeah.
And then one bench on the other side.
Yeah,
so
which
it seems a little sparse for a
yeah.
park.
So we have 1, 2, 3, I think, tables in the lower. Actually, 4 tables in the lower section. We also have the picnic shelter, which is up near the open lawn area, which we're envisioning will be a larger picnic shelter, similar to what we have at Wesley Lynn Park. The development that will be going in around the park, a lot of businesses envisioning, possible company picnics or sport team parties from the high school and things like that, and hoping to utilize some of those adjacent resources for events in the park. But yeah, we can always add, I would say benches is one piece where folks like to make donations for those types of things, so that will probably round out.
Thank you.
Phil, have you got, is the high school construction class, well, I'm not sure they exist anymore because they've gone through a couple of instructors, but
Yeah.
I didn't know if they were still alive and well and whether they were going to assist in this or not.
We have reached out to them, so they were, they did write a letter of support for the state park grant. The previous instructor that has since left was very supportive of this project.
Yeah.
And was very excited about being in such close proximity to the school. It's difficult for them to get off-site when it's far away and then getting back in time for their classes to start the next period. So this was a piece that they were
This was
excited
in the
about.
backyard, yeah. Okay.
Oh, there's more over there. Never mind.
Okay, that was the question I was about to ask, but then.
The
I saw
parking?
that. So
Yeah,
the house down in the lower left, is that going to be park host or is that still private property?
That is owned by the city, so we currently rent it out. For right now, for phase 1, we're doing most of the work on the other side of the wetlands there. So it'll be mostly untouched on that corner. Long term, it was envisioned through the master planning process that would be a community room, community space that could be used for ecology type things with the high school, or a community meeting room for those in the neighborhood. There is also a park host spot just adjacent to it. Yeah.
So I guess I'll ask the evil question. We currently have a maintenance backlog.
We do.
We're building a new park. What are the plans to be able to maintain this facility?
With newer facilities, you're going to have a warranty period, and then you're going to have a newer facility that's going to be easier to maintain. We currently hold the property and are responsible for maintaining the property as is. It will be an additional impact on staff time, probably looking at an additional 10 or so hours per week that staff would need to be on site to maintain the park. And that is challenging. What I struggle to do is we have a very park deficient area. We have a lot of really tightly built-in housing right across the street from that location. And trying to balance, the deferred maintenance piece with needing to provide services for those in our community. Hopefully, as we move forward very shortly with identifying our deferred maintenance backlog, and we'll be coming back to commission very soon with information on where we currently sit, and hopefully be able to strategize on how to provide services for those in the community that currently don't have services, as well as provide for the deferred maintenance backlog that we have at some of our developed parks.
So the timing of this project and the park's maintenance facility, what are they both going to be being constructed at the same time?
More than likely, timing-wise, would be, construction schedule would be 2019 for this facility, very similar, most likely probable timeline for the park operations facility.
I just wondered if having a more efficient and facility to work out of, and you're not driving all over town trying to get to your trucks, and I just wonder if it would free up some time, to do more maintenance, but
Yeah.
eventually.
Definitely, yeah,
Just
we
having
have
more
many
efficient facility.
inefficiencies with our current facilities. I would agree.
I know that it's a long shot.
I know that some parks, some of the newer parks focus on native plant material and things that are really suited toward this climate, so therefore they require less maintenance. Is that kind of part of the thinking?
Yeah, we always look at, when at all possible, low impact pieces that are easier to maintain. The wetlands there, you'll have more of a hopeful low impact application given the natural water coming through the site. You have to balance that with, folks also want green grass to play in, and so there are some pieces that we can work on. There's quite a bit of hardscape on this location as well, which it's not as difficult to maintain staff time wise. The one piece that will be kind of a learning curve for us is the dog park area, as we don't currently maintain a fenced dog park. And when you have confined space as opposed to a wide open dog off leash area, you're going to have more wear and tear and things like that will need some additional support. We are working with PRAC on developing a process for evaluating our current dog off leash areas and developing a plan for how we're providing service. Some communities do have friends groups that are specific to dog services within the agency, so they'll come and they'll rake out, they'll help maintain. Some organizations additionally charge, do like a user fee or friends in monetary support for those kinds of activities, so something we could look at.
Anybody else? Do you want to see if Mr. Mitchell wants to come up from Park and Rec, or? Okay, just checking.
And I will say with the information that's provided, we'll be coming forward with.
Jesus. He was already shaking his head.
We'll be coming forward in the coming months to have you sign off on our architectural contracts as well as our construction bid contracts. So you will see those in the consent agenda most likely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You have anything, Mr. Manager?
I have an update from Mr. John Lewis.
Right, so I thought I'd shake this meeting up a little bit with some discussion on the impacts of Cascadia Zone earthquake, just to give you a quick update, because there's a public announcement that's coming that I wanted to make sure you knew of.
We're all gonna die.
What's that?
We're all gonna die.
No, anticipate that.
So there's an organization that's statewide. It's a regional disaster preparedness organization, and they've been teaming with the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries. So DOGAMI, for those of you that might be curious about who these folks are, that group has done some outstanding work, especially in Clackamas County, Washington County, and Multnomah County. And we get most of our landslide, steep slope mapping that's available to the public through our GIS system. We've got all that through DOGAMI. They've taken that to a whole new level, and on the 15th, Samir, not to put any more stress on your state of the city, but you need to paint a very pretty picture, because the picture that DOGAMI and this group are going to present does have some pretty scary facts in it. And they've been able to take their a lot of data about landslides, soil types, the impacts of a 9.0 earthquake on the metro region, and they've actually quantified that in the amount of damages that'll occur, the number of injuries and life loss, estimate that in this report that they're presenting. So it is a little bit of a shock and awe factor that I think the good news is they're gearing up for this. They're planning press release, and I've already put our Kristen, what's her title? Community Communications coordinator. Thank you. I forgot you were in the back over there. So anyway, try to put her in contact with that, because I think they're expecting us to utilize our social media connections as well to kind of spread the word, because some people will read into this as death and destruction. Others, what the real message is about preparedness and trying to take this to another level, get all communities involved in how to take it to the next step. That's not just the city. I mean, we've got a big role in doing that, and we take that seriously. But the information is what it is. I think it's the best that there's nothing like it in the state or even across the nation with regard to this level of detail. And so it'll be interesting factual data. Be prepared to be surprised with some of the information that they're going to provide. That will come out on the 15th, and I suspect the news media will take it and run with it and paint a variety of pictures. But I think the group has done a lot to promote or be prepared to promote the other side of that, which is, a lot of things about how we as a community, as an agency can prepare, how the community can get information and be informed about that. So I just wanted you guys to know it before it shows up on the news on the 15th. And, we've been participating, so we go to these meetings pretty regularly to kind of get updates on that. And it's going to help inform things like how to deal with infrastructure and maybe how to build better infrastructure in the future. But it's, still, there's a lot of stuff out there that was never built to withstand that kind of a shake. So.
Well, I think it's also an opportunity for individuals and homeowners and neighbors to get together to talk about what do you do in an emergency? How do you contact your family? Do you have a go bag? Do you have enough water to get by? Have you updated your water kits? Have you updated your emergency kit? That's part of this as well, is what the citizens can do to make sure they protect themselves during an event, whether it's an earthquake or other event that we're potentially going to see.
Question. We do have a lot of basalt cliffs that are right next to roads in this city. Are they in danger of crumbling in a severe earthquake?
Well, I think the picture is we're going to see damage, we're going to see rock fall, and in many cases, just based on the precarious nature of some of the locations of our streets, we're going to see those kinds of obstructions in our roadways. And, I think the good news is we are on pretty solid basalt, basalt that's been there for, thousands of years. Is that to say the stuff that's maybe a little loose, kinds of things like ODOT's dealing with along 99E, those measures should help. But I think we're going to see incidents where we'll be responsive. We'll have to be responsive because otherwise people won't be able to get around.
Thank you.
Yeah, concern is more about liquefaction of soils, not basalt. So as soils shake and liquefy, they turn into essentially a quicksand. Basalt's actually probably a good choice to be on at that point in time. That's my non-technical, non-geologist opinion.
Well, it's not going to happen until after I'm done being mayor. We're adjourned.